Hello everyone, I'm Edwin Evers inside the awesome Bass Pro Shops outdoor world right here in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. Let me tell you, we have got one great show for you guys today. Brian Snowden's going to show us how deadly crankbaits can be on catching pre-spawn bass, what to use and where to catch them coming up on In Depth. Then, six-time Angler of the Year Kevin Van Dam's looking at weather patterns and tells us how to avoid danger in Bass School 101. But first, Ott Defoe is going to show us the keys to establishing a productive dock pattern in today's Fishing in 5.
Dock fishing is something that everybody who's bass fished has done at some point in time during their life. Got one. Very first cast of the morning. Today I'm showing you how I break down and figure out a pattern within those docks. I'm fishing right over there, right beside that dock, just like it was supposed to be. Put my little shaky head worm over there and it just sank a couple feet. And he grabbed it. About the time it got to the bottom, see my line swimming off. It's a nice fish. It's all about figuring which docks the fish are using. That way you can eliminate the ones that are going to be dead water. Like this lake here, it's got literally thousands of docks on it. So how do you know which ones to fish? Man, that was fun right there. The very first cast of the morning, right here, it's pretty early. These fish are still roaming around. And I was able to catch that fish on a shaky head just over there off some rocks. But it was real close to a dock. I mean, that's his home bait. That's what those fish use throughout the day. That's where they're going to be here in a little bit whenever the sun gets up. Whenever I start fishing on a lake that's got a lot of docks on it, I'm going to attack it much the way I do a lake that doesn't really have that many. Early in the summer, I'm going to start fishing out on docks that are out more towards the main lake, you know, that are closer to deep water. And I'm going to fish the more main lake, deeper docks throughout the warmer periods of the year. Then once it turns to fall, the water starts cooling off, I'm going to get back up on those flats. It'll still be more main lake flats, nonetheless shallower, flatter docks. That's where most of those fish are going to be. Moving on up into the fall, those fish will still stay shallow on those docks, maybe move back into the banks of the creeks. And in the wintertime, you're going to find them following that same migration, but just back out into deeper water. Same deal in the spring. Those fish will follow, you know, from where they were at in the wintertime out on the real deep dock. Warming up, the fish are going to move all the way back, then you'll start catching them in the banks of the creeks again, back on those real shallow docks. Just typical season migrations, they're using the dock for cover. Whenever I'm fishing docks, I'm always paying attention to what kind of dock it is, whether it's a floating dock or it's a dock that's actually up on piers. And for me, most of the time, the actual floating docks are the ones that are a lot better. They're a lot lower to the water, and they create a lot better shade. The ones that are up on piers will still make shade, but it moves a lot more throughout the day with the angle of the sun. Where those real low ones, that shade pretty much always stays in the same place. But a big deal on those low ones, you gotta be able to skip your bait up under that dock to get it to where those fish are. Early in the morning, they'll be out around the edges and you can just kind of throw around the outside poles or anything like that and be able to catch those fish. But once the sun gets high, you've got to use a bait that you can skip up under that dock, really as far back away as you can as possible. That'll do a couple things. You'll get to fish that haven't seen a lot of baits, and you'll be fishing in areas that don't get a lot of pressure. That's always a big plus. Here we go, that's a better fish. Right on up here, buddy. That's a pretty good fish. Sun's starting to get up a little bit more. These fish are really getting tight to the docks. That fish was way up under there. Made a long skip with that shaky head up under that dock. That's where that fish was at. Get back in the water, buddy. Oh, there we
go. Oh, get out of that motor. Oh man, this is a big one. This is a big one. Dang, this is a good one. That's the fastest spot there. Man, that's another Lake Norman spot right there, another good one. That fish was just like that other one. I threw it out there, and I didn't actually feel the bite on the fall, but the bait had hit the bottom. Whenever I picked up, the fish was already swimming off with it. You need to pay attention whenever you're fishing docks to see if the fish are biting it on the fall, or if you're having to let that bait hit the bottom, then if they're biting it, you know, halfway back to the boat. And that way you can make a lot more effective presentations. You can throw it out there. If they're always biting it on the fall, you throw it out, let it go to the bottom. If you don't get a bite, you reel it in and throw it again. You definitely want to keep that in mind. Dock fishing can be such a great pattern. You know, once you get it figured out which docks those fish are using, you can run it all over the whole lake and catch a lot of fish doing it. But a big part of that is being able to get your bait to where those fish are at. Whenever you're doing that, you want to learn how to skip. Any bait you're throwing, you want to learn how to skip it and get it up under there where those fish are at.
So you're at that time when the fish have wintered and they're heading to the shallows to spawn. Today, Brian's going to show us how the mighty crankbait is a great way to catch them. It is today's In Depth.
One of the most effective lures for pre-spawn bass is the crankbait. It doesn't matter if it's a lipless crankbait, shallow diving square bill, or medium diving crankbait. They work very well for finding these fish. You know, during the pre-spawn, the fish are moving around and they're starting to set up on secondary points or grass lines depending on the lake you're at. And a crankbait is an excellent search bait to find these fish, and once you find them, you can usually catch numerous fish in those locations. You know, when you're checking for these pre-spawn fish, a lot of times these wind-blown secondary points, you know, they're going to move into these little pockets and spawn. So always concentrate, you know, look for those fish to start moving. Later it gets in that pre-spawn mode, more on those secondary points and in those pockets. Let's go get us another one. It's the key to pre-spawn crankbaiting, you know, is always be thinking about where those fish are going to go when they get ready to spawn. And just find the first available drop or break secondary point that's in that area and start just jumping around from one to the other. And usually you're going to get a bite. Looks like a pretty nice smallmouth here. He actually just slapped at the bait. You know, when those bass start looking for their spawning areas, and we're throwing a crankbait cover in water, trying to find those locations, we want to find a place where they're going to spawn. As you can see, we've got a little pocket here, nice flat gravel with a few scattered, you know, buckbrush, willow trees in there. But then you've got this little rock change that starts taking place, a little secondary point before you get into that spawning area. That's one of those key features that you look for when you're trying to pattern pre-spawn bass where they're going to be moving to. You know, you always want to look for that rock change, a little point, a little depression, swing in the bank, someplace that they're going to stage before they actually move up and spawn. Just moved over to another rounded point on the opposite side of where we just caught that last smallmouth, and as you can see, we've got another one. You know, and that just goes to show you can move from one side to the next of those staging areas where those fish are moving in to spawn. And as you can see, we've caught a largemouth here. We just caught a smallmouth on the other side, but they're all doing one thing. You know, the purpose is the same. They're all moving in to spawn. Get over there. It's a nice largemouth. You know, one of the most important things about fishing crankbaits in the pre-spawn before the actual fish go on the beds is controlling the depth of that bait, and then also pay attention to the speed they want it. You know, when you start out earlier in the year and the water's in the upper 50s, you're gonna reel that at a medium steady retrieve with a little bit of pauses in between. As that water warms up, you know, and those fish are just now getting ready to get on the beds, you know, I like to use a medium fast retrieve with a lot of stop and goes, give that a, you know, erratic action of the bait, and I'm always trying to run that bait where I can bounce you know, off of the bottom, saying that 3 to 10 feet. So I'm going to use a bait that that can contact the bottom in that 3 to 8 foot range. And I'm going to keep the boat, you know, in that 10 to 15 foot range and just cover a lot of water till I get a bite. And then once I get a bite, I'm going to slow down and work that area pretty thorough. You know, and when the water starts to warm, that's really going to increase those fish's activity levels. So as the day moves on or progresses on, I'm going to start speeding up that retrieve, more stop and go, letting it bounce off of things, but definitely increase that as that water temperature rises throughout the day. There's one. You know, the great thing about pre-spawn crankbaiting is you can do it throughout the United States. It doesn't matter if the lake has grass or it doesn't have grass. You know, you just need to pick a bait that suits your style. Lipless crankbait, medium to shallow running crankbaits. Depending on what you're actually targeting, what depth of range you're trying to target, just choose the crankbait that works best for you, and you're going to have success cranking in the pre-spawn period. You know, one thing about fishing crankbaits in the early spring is the water can be really cold. You know, up here sometimes we'll start cranking when the water's just above 50. One of the things that I like to do is add a suspend dot or suspend strip, which is just an adhesive back piece of lead. What that does is that creates that allows that bait to rise much slower or stay neutral in the water. And sometimes that really helps your success rate when that water's cold. You can pause that bait, it maintains maximum depth, and during that pause, a lot of times those fish are going to sneak up behind it in that cold water and inhale that bait.
After the fish have wintered and they're heading to the shallows to spawn, Brian's going to show us how the mighty crankbait is a great way to catch them. It's today's In Depth.
The great thing about pre-spawn crankbaiting is it seems to work wherever you go. All you have to do is vary the bait choice based on if you have vegetation or not and what kind of fish you're fishing for. You know, smaller baits if you're fishing for a lot of spotted bass or smallmouth, a little bit larger crankbaits if you're fishing mainly for largemouth. Crankbaits will work everywhere I've been for pre-spawn bass. It doesn't matter which lake you live on. If you got grass, you know, lipless crankbaits work well. You know, even shallow running crankbaits over the top of that grass will catch fish as they're moving up to stage. And you know, in conditions we got, the medium build, deep, you know, 6 to 8 foot seems to work the best for those fish. Another mean smallmouth. You know, during the springtime, you have a lot of rain in most areas. You know, that's when you get 80% of your rain. And we just had a tremendous amount of rain last week. And so that's, you know, really changed the water color. We got a little more color to the water. You know, something that's a little darker than normal is what I'm using today. We got a little bit of orange and brown and black, where normally I'd be using more of a natural color, green, you know, a little more transparent color. But everything, you know, the water will start clearing up and just switch back to those normal colors. But just, you know, use the colors that are conducive to the water clarity you got. You know, if you got off-colored water, use your chartreuses, your reds, things of that nature in the early spring. And if you got clear water, you know, more of the greens and the shad patterns, those tend to work a lot better that are transparent. So just remember those rules of thumb, and pre-spawn crankbaiting, doesn't matter if you're up north or down south, we'll catch fish as those fish start to move up shallow looking for places to spawn. Yeah, that was right as that bait started leaving the bottom, that fish grabbed it. You know, that's one of the important things we want to talk about today is how to control that bait's depth, keep it in the right depth, or increase or decrease that depth depending on what you need that bait to do. What those things pull. Another nice smallmouth. Whoa, quick release. That was really an important fish there. It kind of showed you, you know, I got that bite when that bait was actually leaving the bottom. So it was actually starting to rise toward the boat, you know, and it's important to know what your bait's doing and how deep it's going. I like to control my bait with the size of the line, you know, the bait I actually choose. You can control the depth, you know, by using monofilament versus fluorocarbon. If I want maximum depth, I'm going to use a small diameter fluorocarbon, keep that bait down there. If I want that bait to rise above, say, some grass or fishing it in around real shallow, big rocks, I'm going to use monofilament in a larger diameter because that's going to keep that bait up off of the, you know, from reaching its maximum depth. Another thing you can do is add suspend dots or strips. I really like to use these when the fish first start to come up in the pre-spawn mode, when the water's the coolest. You know, I can put a couple dots on my crankbait, get almost neutral buoyancy, so when I pause that bait in that cold water, it just sits there. I can start moving that bait again. I still have maximum depth, and that bait you can fish real slow and lethargic like those fish are actually acting. Get you a lot more bites and some of the biggest bites you're going to get all year. There we go, nice. Right where that rock change took place. Moving right back into that spawning flat. we go. Yeah. Nice little largemouth. You know, it's real important to pay attention even in the pre-spawn fishing with crankbaits about the bank. You know, you want to understand what kind of rock you're catching those fish on, and then you want to try and duplicate it. As you can see, most of our bites have been coming right where that rock changes from that real small gravel flat to a little bit more ledgy rock, moving toward those secondary points coming in or out of those spawning locations. And you know, it might not necessarily be rock if you're fishing grass. It might be the outside edge, the inside edge of those grass, depending on the water temperature, or little ditches or secondary points of the grass. What I'm visualizing is that rock that you see on the bank is going to come down into the water. So, you know, as you look to the right, you've got the spawning area with the smaller gravel rock, which is easy for them to create a bed in. Then you move over to your left and you start seeing that bigger ledgy rock, you know, and that's their staging area because they can move up and down, got a little sharper breaks to it, not as flat. So they'll position there, feed up on crawfish or shad as they get ready to move into those flat areas to create their beds. And then, you know, one of the nice things about spawning fish is they don't all spawn at the same time. So you're gonna have fish moving from one place to the other. You know, they're gonna move up to spawn. They might even move back out to the same location before they move out to their summertime pattern. Here we go. Well, that popped off that rock and it grabbed it. You know, one of the most important things I can think I could teach an angler about crankbait fishing is always pay attention to your bank. Try and read that bank. I'm always scanning for where that rock is going to break something else, you know, and I'm imagining what's under the water. So, you know, if I see a little gap in there where it might have a rock change and it might only be 4 or 5 feet wide, I'm definitely going to want to crank those edges of that little rock change. So I'm going to make a cast where I think that rock comes down into the water and where that change occurs. So I'm always constantly trying to read those rocks on that bank, looking for my next cast. You know, and it's real important to visualize what you see on the bank and visualize it coming out into the water. Now, granted, some of your key spots are going to be places that don't look like anything on the bank, and they've got a little outcropping of rock that stick out there. You know, those are harder to find, but when you do find them, you can catch a lot of fish because most anglers will have missed them as well. You know, that last bite I got, it was triggered by an erratic movement of the rod. You know, once that, here's another one. What happens is a lot of times it'll hit those rocks, and what I do is when it hits those rocks, I'll give that rod a jerk. And that jerk, you know, just really causes that bait to dart from side to side. And when it does, those fish can't stand it. Pretty amazing. Smallmouth and then largemouth. One pre-spawn fish to another right on the same point. There's a dandy pre-spawn bass. Well, the clouds are starting to burn off. We had some good cloud cover this morning, which, you know, really I think helped the fish bite a little better this morning because of the fact that the clouds were here. You know, on a highland reservoir with clear water, that cloud cover really makes the fish stay shallow and, you know, be a little more aggressive than normal and easier to catch. But, you know, even with the sunshine, I think we're still going to be able to catch quite a few pre-spawn fish. And one of the things you want to remember too is as that sun comes out and that water warms up, especially in the pre-spawn, they're going to become more active. So that really works in your favor when you're trying to cover water and catch them with crankbaits.
Here's a fast fact for you. If you like throwing a frog like I do, make sure that you've got it on a rod and reel with braid. Braided line gives you some real advantages. First off, in this really heavy cover like these pads, when you get a bite, you can hook that fish and get them out because there's no stretch to it. The second thing is it floats, so it keeps the frog up on top. You barely have to twitch that rod and make that frog walk right in place. You're going to catch a lot more fish if you're using braided line with your frog.
So you've had your trip planned for weeks. You've got the fish all dialed in, then comes Mother Nature and that inevitable curveball. KVD shows us how to roll with the punches in Bass School 101. Class is now in session.
Boy, looking at the radar on my phone, there's a big front, and it's gonna pass just north of us, and it's actually just coming through right now. You know, the weather is one of the most important things that I watch when I'm going out to try to determine what I might fish that day, what the mood of the fish might be, what patterns might develop out there. You know, basically, the bass is a low light feeder. And when you have a low pressure system like this that comes in, you've got a window that'll open up where these fish will go crazy. They'll get real active. You know, that's where you want to throw a spinnerbait or a crankbait or a jerkbait, because the strike zone gets a lot bigger. You know, you got the wind, you got these clouds, it's low light, they're gonna go out on the prowl. They know they've got an advantage over the shad and the bluegill, and they're gonna be a lot more active, and they'll chase a bait a long ways. So today's the day you wanna throw your power baits, spinner baits, crankbaits, you know, fast moving lures that you can cover a lot of water with. As soon as that front passes, they're gonna hunker down, they're gonna get tight to this cover like this wood, and I'm probably gonna have to change to a different technique, you know, something slower, something that I can fish vertically and keep in the strike zone longer, like a jig or a drop shot. The weather is something that I watch religiously. The Weather Channel is something you should check every time you go fishing to see what's going to happen during that day that you're fishing, what's kind of came through in the past, because it'll give you a good idea what the mood of the fish might be and a good starting point as to what techniques you could use for that day. If you've got a fishing trip planned, watch the Weather Channel, check the hourly forecast, and plan your day around it. If you watch the weather, your bass fishing is really going to improve. That's it. Class dismissed.
Hey everybody, and welcome to Concord, North Carolina, home of the beautiful Bass Pro Shops outdoor world. We've got a great show planned for you today, and I guarantee you're going to learn something. Today, Rick Clun is going to talk to us about one of his favorite techniques, topwater fishing, and what he's called the New Age chugger, in this week's In Depth. Then, Timmy Horton is going to show us how to safely get your boat on and off the trailer at the boat ramp in this week's Bass School 101. But first, Kevin Van Dam's up with summertime crankbait fishing. He's going to show us just how effective they can be for catching fish after fish in this week's Fishing in 5.
That's a good one there. Oh my God, did he kill it? I mean, I was just burning that crankbait along, and he hammered it right when I stopped it. The smallmouth will flex a hook. That's a good one right there. They'll flex it. I mean, I had him with one hook. That triple grip right there locks him in there, though. It's just awesome. You got to have really good hooks if you're going to crank for these big smallies, because they just jump so much, fight so hard. You got to be ready on every aspect of your equipment. You know, this big long rod with the fiberglass composite, it really acts as a shock absorber when they're jumping and fighting out there, and you can cast a long ways with it, and physically it makes it a lot easier to be out here cranking all day with a big rod like this too. So fluorocarbon lines low and stretch, so you get a good hook set, and those hooks really hold them. So that's what you want to see, is fish like that right there. That's probably a small school of perch that we just went by. There we go. Not as big as I thought. Boy, when they hit it, they really pull. I was seeing a lot of bait on the graph, and that's one of the things for me this time of year. I generally don't even fish. Oh, he got up. I generally don't even fish in an area like this until I'm seeing a bunch of dang bait around in the area. You know, you want to see pods of fish and things like that. You can see right on my graph right here, I just caught that one. I had another one on there. I can see a bunch of bait on my graph right here. That's what I want to look for. You know, here on the Great Lakes, we're fishing these vast flats. But even in a place like Table Rock or Bull Shoals, Amistad, any of the Clearwater lakes in the south, it's the same thing. And I'm going to try to fish the zone that they're in, and that's critical, because if I can see that there's a lot of activity at a certain level, then I've got something to target. You know, I've got a zone to target. So that is really, really important to pay attention to your electronics. I'm not even going to fish until I find an area that's got a lot of activity and a lot of bait. There's a good one. He smoked it. You know, any bass, when you got clear water like that, it's very visual, they're very sight oriented, and they really want to hammer that bait. Oh. You know, out here on the Great Lakes in the summer, these big smallmouth, they're out here roaming. I mean, they're looking for bait. So when you got to cover vast amounts of water like this, you know, a crankbait is a great way to do it. The key thing to remember, we got clear water up here. You know, since we've got zebra mussels, the water's cleared up, these fish are sight feeders, and they've moved deeper. So, you know, back in the past, we used to fish shallower, catch a lot of them with jerk baits and things like that. Now they're in deeper zones, so you either got to throw a finesse bait down on the bottom, or you got to throw a reaction bait that you can cover that water efficiently with. So a crankbait is one of my favorite tools. Once I get a great area, a lot of times I'll slow down with a finesse bait, but this is a great tool to catch them when it's like this. You know, normally I'm not a huge fanatic about color when I'm throwing crankbaits. You know, I want general hues and stuff when the water's stained, but in this clear water situation, you gotta have that natural colored bait. I mean, it's gotta match the forage. So a lot of times, you know, I'm gonna throw things that, you know, look like what I think the fish are feeding on until I see the bass spit up a shad or a bluegill or something. So, you know, the natural bluegill patterns, something like this green gizzard shad, natural shad patterns, things like that, instead of the, you know, the bright chartreuses and the bright whites and things like that. So subtle color patterns make all the difference in the world. Another thing, I always rig a bait with a rattle and one without. You know, that silent bait in these clear water situations, a lot of times is absolutely what the fish want. I experiment with both until I get a bite or two on one or the other, because I've seen it, you know, both ways. Where one day that rattling bait just draws them from a long ways and they just crush it. And other days they want that silent bait. So have a good mix of natural colors, some rattling and some non-rattling baits, and you're ready to go. God, he bit right underneath the boat. Most of the time, when you're out here cranking like this, those fish bite on the end of a long cast. What I'm always doing when you're out here, and this is what's different about cranking in clear water as opposed to stained water or fishing ledges down south, is if you're fishing where you got clear water and you got bass in the summer, a lot of times they're suspended. That's the one time of the year and the one technique that I love to fish a crankbait where I'm not actually hitting the bottom. First and foremost, it's speed. You want to retrieve that bait faster. The other thing is it's got to look natural to the forage. So if you got a natural looking color on a crankbait that's getting down into the zone where the fish are living and it's moving fast, they're not going to get as good a look at it. You're going to catch a lot of them that way. But on top of that, you want to add a lot of action. That fish right there, I'm burning that bait along, I stop it, I jerk it. As soon as I jerked it, wham, he smoked it right as it was coming up underneath the boat. He hammered it. So you want to stop it, start it, jerk it, twitch it, make it look like it's erratic, like it's wounded, and you'll trigger these fish faster and more erratic.
Chuggers have been very effective topwater lures all throughout the years, but Rick Klein has developed a new one he's called the New Age Chugger, and that's today's In Depth.
I'll never forget the first fish I ever caught on a artificial lure. And it was on a red and white Lucky 13. Wonder how many of you recognize this bait. I know if you're my age, you probably do. This is a Head and Lucky 13, but it's more than just a Head and Lucky 13. It's one of the originals. It's actually made out of wood. If you look at it, it's got the glass eyes. And this little chugger here, and that's what we're going to be fishing today, is chuggers. But really, there's no two chuggers are exactly the same. And this was kind of the original chugger that I fished. In fact, it's probably responsible for me even being a bass fisherman. I'll never forget the first fish I ever caught on a artificial lure, and it was on a red and white Lucky 13. And it really happened I was young, 6, 7 years old. My dad always took me fishing with him. We were on a vacation out in California, and all of our relatives showed up at the campground at the lake where we were at. And they were all loading up the boat to go fishing, and I started to get in, and my dad goes, "Rick, I'm sorry, but the boat's full today. You know, I'm gonna take all the relatives out. You know, I'll come back later this evening and take you." And that was the very first time I could remember him ever telling me I couldn't go with him. And it literally broke my heart. I mean, I had tears coming down my face. And he sees it, and he reaches and grabs his favorite rod and reel, which was an old casting rod and reel, and he has red and white Lucky 13 tied on. And hands it to me and said, "Hey, just fish right around the bank here, and we'll come back in this evening and I'll take you back out." Well, immediately this excited me because he never let me touch that rod and reel. I mean, that was off limits, you know. And here I am with his rod and reel, and which I always wanted to get my hands on. And so I started fishing down the bank there, not throwing this, just, you know, Lucky 13 out in the water. And then, like most 6-year-olds, 7-year-olds, your attention span is about a minute, and I'd thrown it out, and I'm piddling around looking in the water, and I'm kicking rocks looking for crawfish, and all of a sudden I hear this call, whoosh, and I looked up just in time to see this bass just coming out of the water in kind of slow motion with this red and white lure on his nose, and it scared me. And I didn't even set the hook, I didn't start reeling, I took off running. And I ran up the bank with the rod and reel and drug this poor fish about 3 foot up on the bank. And he come off, and he starts flopping back toward the water. And then all of a sudden, I don't know how it happened, I just know I'm in the air like this linebacker fixing to cover a fumble. And I land on the fish about the time he gets to the water, and I grab him, and I'll never forget it. I mean, that was the very first bass I ever caught on an artificial lure, and I loved it. Because up until then, you know, we caught them on crickets and we caught them on worms, the stuff they got to eat. All of a sudden, I fooled that bass, at least in my mind, on this little piece of wood. And that's when my fascination with artificial lures began and my love for bass fishing began. And it began with the red and white Lucky 13. How I'm going to be working this bait is kind of unique. It's a real quick, almost a real sped up version of working a Zero spook. Because you got to feed the bait line just like you would a Zero spook. Because I'm trying to get, this bait doesn't walk like a Zero spook, but it does try to kick side to side. But the real thing I want is the wrist motion that creates that spitting sound versus the chugging sound. And you say, well, why? Well, why is because I just catch more fish when I get the spitting sound. And I'm not talking about today. I'm talking about in my career, 25 years of fishing this bait now. And so you really pay attention to how I'm working this bait and when it's coming through the water, because it really is a very quick walk back and forth. But really it's that sound, that spitting sound, and you can see the water shooting out ahead of it. I mean, it's not just an explosion of water like a fish ate it when somebody chugs a chugger. You actually see the water. You watch here, you'll see the water just spitting ahead of the bait like it's spitting the water out. To work it right is kind of a visual as well as sound. You listen to it. That's always been the beauty of this technique, though, is that it really it's not limited just to morning like the old traditional ideal of, you know, top water early in the morning, late in the evening. Some of my best days have been, you know, 10 o'clock on in the middle of the day. A little bitty chugger will catch some good fish, though. I've caught up to 7-pounders on them, you know. There's not really any more exciting way to catch them. You know, I like burning the spinnerbait, but still, top water's hard to beat.
Topwater fishing is one of the most enjoyable ways to fish, and throwing a chugger style bait is a great way to do that. For me, I'm going to pick up a chugger style bait over other baits, other topwater baits, when the water has a lot of color to it, or especially when the fish are spawning. Because when the fish are spawning, if you throw a popper over there, twitch it a couple times, then let it sit above a bass that's on the bed, he's not going to like it. You're going to get some really vicious strikes.
You know, I can remember back when I was fishing in the early days, even in the bass club days in the late 60s, that you'd hear these guys go, I'd rather catch 1 fish on a topwater lure than 100 on that old plastic worm. And a lot of people still feel that way, and that's, and I love topwater. You know, topwater is still one of the most exciting techniques it is, because it's visual. You get to see the strike, and you actually get to work the bait and become the bait. And now it's not always easy, because topwater I consider probably one of the more fragile lures we use, because you know, when is a fish willing to come up and take something off the surface? This is the Lucky 13, but I want you to kind of look at this bill, okay? Notice that lower part of that bill actually extends out further than the top. And so what does that do? Because every bait lure has a certain element in it that is the function of it. A spinnerbait, it's the blades. It's not the skirt, it's not the color. But with chuggers, it's that bill. Okay, that creates its function. And with that bill on the Lucky 13 extending further out like that, you could get the chugging sound, because it's floated, it's wood, now plastic, it float. But that bill extending further out like that actually created like a little crankbait. This Lucky 13 will dive under like a shallow running crankbait. That was probably some of the original chuggers that there were. Now the next chugger that came along, actually the top and the bottom extended the same. There wasn't a difference, and that chugger wouldn't dive. It was really what we call the traditional chugger. Bloop, bloop, bloop. It made that bloop plop sound. You'd chug it, and then let it sit there, and chug it, let the ripples go away, let it sit there. And that was really what most people kind of grew up as fishing a chugger, especially after the Lucky 13. Then came along this strange little creature that I'm pretty sure that it really happened by accident. That now the lower part of the bill is actually shorter than the top part. So what does that do for the lure? What that did is it ain't going to dive, and it really doesn't chug. What it does is it creates a little spinning walking bait. I had a customer of mine that started fishing this bait, and he fished it in a way I'd never seen a chugger fish before. He fished it very fast. And really, you're trying to get away from very much of the chugging sound and getting into this. And it's really a very high-speed way of working a chugger. And the thing that impressed me, because I guided this guy for about 10 years, and he would fish it in any season, in any kind of weather, and he would catch fish on it. And I mastered the way he fished it, and I really kept it a secret in my early career because I won quite a few tournaments on it. Caught most of my fish in the first U.S. Open. I won on it, and the only people that even knew about this chugger were some of the boys that guided out of the marina with me, Zell, Roland, Randy Fight, and a few others. And we started buying up all the ones when we traveled across country fishing tournaments. Why were we buying them up? Because they weren't made no more. Rebel had discontinued it. And finally, Zell Rowland won an event at Chattanooga, Tennessee, called BASS Super Tournament, and he spilled his guts, and I could have killed him. And anyway, overnight it became popular. But we had the only ones available. So Rebel brought the chugger back, and this is why I said earlier, I don't think this bill was intentional originally, because when they destroyed all their early modes, they had to build new modes, and when they brought the modes back, unfortunately, did not make this lip short. This lip stuck out, and now it was the new ones were like the traditional chugger. All it would do is chug; it wouldn't spit. I was running out of them. I had probably more than anybody in the country of the original Pop R's. And Norio Tanabe, who was fishing the BAS circuit, came to me and said, "I can make that bait for you." And anyway, he did. And this is the modern day version of the original Pop R, and this is the Rico, and this is the first modern day Japanese version of that original chugger. And it was really made better, and they put better hooks on it, a good tail feather on it, and cosmetics were better. So the whole bait really, fortunately, from that time frame improved. But now what I will be fishing today will be this space age version of the Pop R, which we call the Rico. There we go. You're feisty, dude. You're feisty. I like your energy. That's the 8th or 9th jump that fish has made. You know, one of the things that kind of gives you some keys where you might have resident shallow water fish, one of the things, of course, is the color of the water. If it's off color of water, but I'm not talking about muddy, but just off color, that's a good indicator. I kind of use the old deal where there's no light, there's no life, and so the fish aren't going to go as deep in off color water. The other things I look for are shoreline habitat, that I know when the lake's up, that shoreline habitat holds a lot of fish shallow. One of the things I look for is flat areas that have a lot of willow trees, because those willow trees, even though they may not be in the water now, have to be in the water parts of the year in that lake. But when they are, it attracts a lot of shallow water fish. But one of my other favorites that this lake has is willow weed. It grows right on the edge of the shoreline. And as the lake recedes, that willow weed will try to actually grow out and follow the lake out. But it's another real good indicator of, hey, this area probably has, resident shallow water fish, and it'd be a good area to fish with topwater. But again, it's a bait you may not get a lot of strikes on, but the ones you do make you want to throw it again forever. And this is the bait now that I depend on anytime I'm fishing this type of chugger.
I want to show you a few different things whenever you're trying to pick out a crankbait, but you have to know which one is going to fit the situation that you're going to be fishing. As a general rule of thumb, longer billed baits are going to dive deeper. Short billed baits like this one are going to be shallow divers. And like this one, it has a square bill in it. It's going to do really good in heavy cover around a lot of wood or a lot of grass. This longbill bait has a rounded end on it. That's going to do better around rocks and more open top water. Just consider what the bill is, its length, and its shape, and you'll pick the right tool for the job. Have you ever been frustrated or even embarrassed whenever you're trying to launch your boat? Tim Horton is going to show us the right way to do it this week in Bass School 101. Class is now in session.
Oh man, what a fun day. But I'm gonna tell you, every good fishing day comes to an end. And we're gonna show you some loading tips that's gonna help you next time you're out on the water. When I'm backing my boat in the water, one thing I like to do is keep my left hand on the very top of the steering wheel. And I like to back with my mirrors. And I like to keep that trailer just a little bit in both mirrors. Now, if it's getting loaded up on the left side mirror and I'm not seeing on the right side, I simply turn the top of my hand, the top of the steering wheel, to the left until it starts to disappear in that mirror and I start gaining it in the right mirror. Get those bunks completely wet. In other words, submerge the trailer more than you're going to when you leave it stationary when loading the boat. Now, the distance that I like to do is to get my fenders halfway underwater from the front to back. Engage the emergency brake at all times. You don't want an accident of that vehicle popping out of gear. Now, when guiding the boat up on the boat trailer, try to get it as straight as possible and keep a steady speed until you get up on the trailer. Try to get the V of the bow, the very nose of it, centered as much as you can, and pay attention to that as you're easing between those bunks. And keep the boat in a steady speed. If you let off the gas, that's going to cause the back end to go to the right or left. Use your power trim to get that motor up off the bottom a little bit. Now, when you start getting up on the trailer, give it the right amount of gas to push that boat up onto the bow roller. That's when you want to go to the front and lock the bow into position with the strap. And when loading with a partner, get the trailer completely submerged, except this time when he pulls up, pull up a little bit further than you normally would. This is going to make it easier for you to get the boat lined up and get the V of that bow right in the center of those bunks. Now, as you get that up on there, have him back in a little bit more at a steady rate while you're loading the boat and driving it up on the trailer. Believe it or not, I've talked to people that have not bought a boat because they were intimidated by loading it. Practice these tips over and over, and you're going to see it will become as easy as casting a reel.
Welcome everyone to another phenomenal Bass Pro Shops outdoor world. This one here, Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. Today, we guarantee you're gonna learn something, so let's get started. Stacy King has mastered every finesse technique there is, but this one he's come to love, and it's the Mojo rig. He's gonna break it all down for us in depth. Then, if you've ever got a hook stuck in your hand, you won't want to miss as Brian Snowden demonstrates his first aid technique of hook removal. It's coming up in Bass School 101. But first, Kevin Van Dam's going to take us to the clear waters of Michigan's Lake St. Clair. Spinnerbaits are his weapon of choice. Here comes Fishing in 5.
Up there. Big one. Golly. He hammered it. There is nothing better than a smallmouth on a spinnerbait. I mean, it's 2 foot deep out here, 3 foot deep. I'm just looking for fish, and you know, I'm on a giant flat, and the only thing that's there is a few isolated weed clumps. Look there, just got him on the trailer hook. I've had 4 or 5 come up and boil on it and not get it. I mean, I've got to cover so much water that a spinnerbait is hard to beat. These fish are feeding on bait fish on these shallow flats like this time of year. And you know, just anything else, it's so slow. This I can cover a ton of water with. And if you're fishing it high in the water column like that, even though it's super shallow, I can trigger a lot of them into biting it. It's a little bit where they're getting such a good look at it. That's a blueback herring color, and it's very natural. It's got small blades on it, and I'm fishing it real fast. And you know, when I do get a bite on it, they just absolutely kill it. There we go. There's a bunch of them swimming right with him. they don't give up. There's a good chunk right there. I'm kind of right along the edge of one of the channels here, just throwing up on the edge where the current's going over it. And same thing though, there's isolated weed clumps there, just burning that spinnerbait along. You know, I've missed quite a few, and when you're missing them like that, usually that means that they're probably getting too good a look at it. So what I try to do is, I'm gonna hit him with that trailer hook again. I try to get a really good stop and start motion going with it. You know, so I'll burn it, kill it, stop it, and start it just for a split second, and that'll trigger him to bite. You know, when you're burning a spinnerbait in clear water like this, you want a spinnerbait designed for it. Today I was throwing the KVD Scorcher. This is a Bass Pro Shops exclusive, and it is designed just for high-speed retrieves. It's got a head design, a little heavier wire, and we put smaller blades on it. This is a 1/2 ounce size. It comes in 3/8, 1/2 ounce, and 3/4 ounce. All of them built for speed. So you got a fast retrieve. This is a blueback herring color. It's a great bait fish color up here, and it comes standard with a trailer hook already on it. So it's ready to go right out of the package for these smallmouth. This kind of fish, it wasn't big one too. There's a whole bunch with them too. Look at them all. There's tons of them. Look at them all. Wow. When you're smallmouth fishing, that's what you're looking for right there. When he's got buddies and friends, so often you'll find one and there'll be just, you know, that 1 or 2 fish. But when there's a whole bunch of them together like that, you know you've got something that's really holding them. They're hitting that spinnerbait a little better, man. I'm making them react to it. So that's what you have to do most of the time, is figure out what retrieve they want. You know, just reeling it with a straight retrieve doesn't cut it most days. If they're really eating, you can catch them that way, but almost always in this clear water like this, I gotta jerk it, stop it, start it, make those blades pulse, do something to trigger that fish to react to that bait, to commit. You know, they're following it, but to get that final commitment out of them, for them to put it all the way in their mouth and to eat it good. And boy, without a trailer hook, I wouldn't be catching any of these. You know, the one thing when you're throwing a spinnerbait for smallmouth is they are going to mangle your bait. And I like to be able to tune that bait. And what I mean by that is I want to be able to adjust that gap for speed. You got to make sure that this wire coming out of the head and the wire with the blades on it and the hook are all 3 in the line. So I'm going to bend that back. And then I like to, again, close that gap down a little bit. That allows that bait to move faster through the water, and it's not going to roll over. If your spinnerbait isn't running straight up and down, if it's running tilted one side or the other, you're not going to get bit on it. I mean, you want that thing running perfectly true so the blades are right over the body when they're looking up at it. That's what creates the illusion of bait fish to them, and will really fool them in this clear water. They can get some air. They're definitely sitting in that one spot. Oop. Quick release.
When it comes to finesse fishing, there's no doubt Stacy King is one of the best. Stacy is going to bring us one of his all-time favorites, and he's got his Mojo working today. He brings it all to us in depth.
You can catch a lot of bass using this technique. This is a shallow water technique. I'm talking about a Mojo rig. Here's your standard Carolina rig. It's got all the hardware up here, heavyweight beads, clackers. Then you've got a real long leader with a big lizard way out here on the end. But today, we're gonna be fishing a mini Carolina rig. Mojo sinker, short leader, and a mini lizard. Oh, That feels like a good one. He hit it right here by the boat. Gotcha. Yes. Fat little smallmouth. Boy, she pretty bass. Looks like a spawned out female. Put her back in. Go up, baby. You know, the conditions I'm fishing today are primarily post-spawn. There might be a few fish still on the bed, but it's mostly over with. But the color, lots of color in the water, so the fish are still pretty shallow. And we got a real high pressure system today. The sky's real blue and bright. And I know on the weather this morning, it said that the pressure was real high. So the fishing's pretty darn tough when you get down to it. And this technique I'm using with the Mojo rig and Light Carolina rig is something that you're still going to be able to catch some pretty nice fish and get some bites with. I don't know what other bait I could be going down these same banks and getting bites right now because the fish are just lethargic. They're not wanting to feed, but that little bait coming along in front of them, once in a while, one of them will take it. Oh man, that's a good one. You like that old lizard, didn't you? Release her back. I'm going to show you how to fix up this Mojo rig right here. What you do is you slip your line through this little cylindrical sinker like this, and then you take this little tool, it's a little double wire tool, and slip it right up through the hole. I like to put it in from the bottom side and pull your rubber through from the top. And then you kind of pull that open with your finger, take a little piece of strip of rubber like this. That's the same kind of rubber they use on jig skirts. And then you just pull that back down through your little sinker. And what that does, that snugs that line up and it doesn't mar your line. And I like it real well. It works great on, this is basically called a Mojo style rig. And it really works good. And also, one thing about it, when you get some frays in your line down here, you can wet your line with a little saliva, and then you can slide that sinker up there and then start right over with a new leader. And that's a great way to fish it, especially on light tackle. Oh, got him. Don't think he's very big, but I got him. Yes. Threw up on that old launch ramp over there with my head a sticko on, and drug that little Light Carolina rig off that launch ramp, and thump, he got it. When I'm fishing a Light Carolina rig, I like to use a spinning rod and a bait caster. This is a 7-foot, 2-inch Johnny Morse Extreme Series bait casting rod. It's a medium heavy action, and with this rod, I'll use a little heavier line. I use somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 to 17 pound test on this when I'm fishing, depending on the cover I'm fishing and how big the fish I feel like I'm going to be catching. And then I like to use a spinning rod like this one right here. So a 7-foot, 2-inch model, but it's a medium action spinning rod. This is the one I'm going to fish 6 to 10 pound test line on. I've got 8-pound test line on there today. I'm using the Bass Pro Shops XPS fluorocarbon. I mean, I love that stuff for fishing a Carolina rig. It's so sensitive, low stretch, you feel the bites good and you get good hook sets, and it's real abrasive resistant, so that's the type of line I use. But these rods, I like that 7-foot, 2-inch rod for Carolina rigging because most of you know that have tried to fish Carolina rigs. It's kind of awkward to throw. That thing, you've got to kind of lob it out there. So if you've got a little bit longer rod, you've got more leverage to throw that bait out there with or throw the rig out and work the bait back. It also gives you more leverage when you hook a good fish to fight him in and get him in. So I'm using standard reels. This is a 5-to-1 gear ratio, 4000 series spinning reel. And my bait cast reel is a 6.4 gear ratio reel, Johnny Morse Signature Series reel. Good equipment, and I catch a lot of bass on them. I really like this stuff for this type fishing. Got that one. Yeah. Not real big, but real stout. Pretty largemouth. Come in here. Yes. Pretty green fish. Go up, baby.
An important tip, in my opinion, when you're Mojo fishing is your rod position. When you're worm or jig fishing, you want to have that rod from that 10 to 12 position. You want to bring that bait up off the bottom, let it fall back down. But when you're Mojo fishing, I want to drag it to the side. There's 2 reasons. You're going to have a lot better feel. You're going to have better contact with the bottom so you can feel those really subtle bites when you're fishing this rig. Another reason is by not lifting your rod up, by dragging it to the side, you've got a lot better direct contact with that bait. No slack, you're gonna get a good hook set.
Got him. Little jumper. Look how he shines in that sunlight. Come on in here, fella. Pretty little spotted bass. He ate that big old long worm. This is a Gamakatsu G-Lock hook, and I really like this style hook for Carolina rigging or Mojo or light Carolina rig fishing, because it's got this little indent right here in the shank, and that really holds your bait in place on the hook. And with this EWG style bend in this hook, once you get a fish hooked with this thing, it's just not going to come off. It's a fairly light wire hook, but it's extremely strong, and boy, it penetrates good. It's a great hook for this style fishing. Got him. Come here, baby. Yes. And there's a big old spot. Come here, baby. Pretty spot. Go up, baby. Here's some of the stuff that I'm using today. These little fish doctor type baits, centipedes. Here's a Bass Pro Sticko. That's one of my favorite soft plastic, and it really works good on a little light Carolina rig in shallow water. Here's a Bass Pro Shops finesse worm. I've caught some on that today. And then these little mini lizards, a 4 and a 5 inch. I catch a ton of fish on those mini lizards. They're just great this time of the year. Oh, that one's a better one right there. Yeah. I mean, that sucker got it. Pull a little drag there. Come on, yes. Nice little largemouth. Pretty largemouth. Okay, now I want to see you again about this time next year. Bye-bye. Here's some neat little knickknacks that have come along in the last few years that make Carolina rig fishing a lot easier. I'm going to show you 4 or 5 things here that I think are pretty cool. This is the Carolina Keeper, and the way this little plastic gizmo works is you take your pliers, your snippers, and you just pinch it like that, and it's got a slit in the middle, and that opens up, and you thread your line right through that hole, and you can slide it up and down on your line, but when you release it, that tightens back up, and it gets fast on the line. It won't move. So then you've got your sinker above that, and it just takes the place of tying a swivel in your line, and it really is handy at times. And what I like to do is take one of these little brass, it's a Bass Pro Shop, it's called a shortcut brass thing, and you put that thing on there, and then you put your sinker on, and it ticks and makes noise. You know, a lot of times we'll use glass beads in that situation too, but I like this little brass deal. It works real good and it makes a lot of noise, and that Carolina Keeper will hold that in place. And I'm going to show you another thing here that's pretty cool. This Bullet Weights T-stop right here. They come in a little deal like this, or a little rubber thing, and it's tapered at the end. It's a long little deal that's tapered down like this, and what you do, you take your Mojo rig type sinker and slip on your line, and then you slip this little deal right in there, if I can get it to go in like this, and that slips right through, and then you pull it through and pull it snug, and that keeps that sinker fast on your line. And what you do then is take your snippers and just snip each end of it off. And one thing I like about this type deal, you can always move, you know, if you fray your line up down here, you can wet that a little bit, slide that sinker up, and then cut it off and retie again without having to go through all the hassle of tying to the swivels. And I like that in particular when you're using the larger diameter lines. Also, if you go back to the old split shot method, and this is one thing that we started many years ago, fishing a split shot, just crimping a split shot on your line and then a hook and a soft plastic bait. Well, they've come out with a new sinker. It's called a clam shot, and it's more pointed on both ends, and it comes through rocks a lot better. So I would rather use one of those than I would a split shot. That clam shot works real good. And the other little neat deal is this thing right here. It's called a Carolina Shortcut. Bass Pro sells that. It's a pretty neat deal because you can tie your main line to one end and your leader line to the other, and you don't have the hassle of putting the sinker and the beads and the clickers and everything on there. And that makes it easy to rig right there. And these are just a few of the innovations that have come up in the last few years that have made Carolina rig fishing a lot easier. Oh, I've got that one. Pretty fish. Yeah, bigger than I thought he was. Yes. Come here, be still, be still, be still. You're caught. Man, I mean, he is stuck. Got a pretty spotted bass. Okay. Oh, come on, grow up and let me catch you again, all right? Boy, you know, there's a lot of times when downsizing really pays off. It's bailed me out in several major tournaments over the years. Try it. I think you have a lot of fun, and I bet you put a lot more fish in the boat.
Here's a fast fact for you. You always got to be prepared for whatever happens out there on the water. We got this heavy cloud cover and the wind just laid down, and you know, I started seeing these bass chasing shad, so you got to be ready. You know, my favorite thing is to throw topwater because, you know, big stick bait like this, you can cast a long ways. It's got a good rattle in it, and you know, it just draws these fish up. The other thing is a spoon. You know, you want to have something that you can cast a long way that looks like the real bait fish that they're eating, the shad that they're chasing.
This is one thing I can tell you, you better hope never happens. You're out in the middle of a lake, in your boat, and you got a hook in your hand. Brian Snowden's gonna show us what to do. Bass School 101, class is now in session.
You know, if you fish long enough, you're eventually going to get a hook in you. And I recommend highly seeking professional help, going to the hospital if you can. But sometimes there's situations, if you're in a tournament, if you're way out on the body of water where you can't get back in easy. I want to show you a technique that's helped me and several other people that I've been with continue fishing the rest of the day by removing a hook with very minimal pain, very little bleeding. First of all, you're going to use some very strong braided line. 65 or greater is what I recommend. I always just carry a little bit in the boat with me. We're going to use this apple to demonstrate the hook in you. Is you're basically going to take the braided line and I put it through about half it. Then you're going to run it through just a couple times to make sure it does not slip or move. You're wrapping it around the bend of the hook. Usually 3 times is sufficient. Wrap this around your hand so you don't move or don't lose your grip. Because this requires a little bit of belief. You know, you want to do it once, quick and hard. The key is to actually have that around the bend of the hook and then place tension on the shank of the hook against the skin. This pressure is going to actually push down on the hook so the barb does not pull through your skin again. And it's going to come out the exact same way it went in, with very little bleeding or pain, with a quick jerk. Now a treble hook is a little different situation. We're going to use basically the same procedure. What I would recommend doing here is first removing the lure, so when you give it that hard pull, none of the other treble hooks from the lure get into your hand. I like to go ahead and take a pair of wire cutters and cut the other 2 treble hooks off, and then basically we're going to repeat the same process of wrapping the braided line around the bend of the hook and applying pressure to the shank of the treble. And with a quick jerk, pops it right out. 2 barbs are a little more tricky, but it can be done the exact same way. Usually you'll want to take one off with the wire cutters and then do them individually. That way it causes the least amount of pain, and you can continue fishing that the rest of the day.
Hey everybody, and welcome to the #1 show in bass fishing. Every week we get to start in one of these beautiful Bass Pro Shop outdoor worlds. And this week is no different. We're in Concord, North Carolina. Today I'm going to talk to you about catching fish in really deep water on a swim bait. These are suspended fish. That's this week's In Depth. Then Kevin Van Dam is going to show us how he matches his rods to his reels gear ratio to set up the correct combo in Bass School 101. But first, Stacy King is going to talk to us about a hot new finesse technique from overseas called the Zika rig. That's this week's Fishing in 5.
Oh, yeah. Oh! Where you going, big boy? It's very seldom that anything new and exciting comes along in the field of bass fishing. You know, about a year ago, we were fortunate enough that the umbrella rig was discovered, and that's been a lot of fun. Gotcha. All right. And now I found out about this Zika rig this summer, and man, I've been catching lots of fish on it. Pretty thing, fat and healthy. I'm gonna let you go. It's just a new alternative technique that you really need to try. You can buy them pre-rigged, make them yourself. Either way, you need to get them in your tackle box and give them a try. You know, when I first started hearing about this rig, I heard it pronounced Zika, Jika, J-rig, Hika rig, and I finally found out from some Japanese friends of mine, Shiniki and Mayu Fukai, that it's Zika rig. But it's just an alternative to a Texas rig, and it's a great bait presentation. It's just an offset worm hook with a split ring through the eye of the hook. You want a good small wire split ring, but you want a good strong one. And then you take a sinker, like a bell sinker, a cylindrical type sinker, something with an eye on it, and you slip it on the split ring also, and then you tie your line right on above the sinker. And that sinker stays on the bottom or stays below the bait and gives that bait a lot of freedom of movement. It really looks like something live moving through the water. You know, I like this bell sinker on the bottom when you're dragging over gravel and rock. It seems to be real effective. And going down through grass and wood, maybe a drop shot type sinker like I've got right here. But it's easy. If you got a bunch of old sinkers around the house, you can make them yourself. You just need a good quality hook like this EWG Gamakatsu. Get you some old sinkers, put you a good quality split ring through the eye and hook it on there and put a plastic bait on there and you're ready to go catch some bass. You know, there's a lot of different ways to fish a Zika rig. You can just reel it right across the bottom, ticking the bottom once in a while like you would a hard head type bait. Right now, I'm swimming mine a little more. I like to swim those big worms anyway. I'm a Texas rig fishing fanatic, you know, and I'll swim that big worm off the bottom, and I'm doing the same thing, but I'll let that sinker go down and tick those rocks and that gravel every once in a while. You know, it's you come into little rough patches every once in a while, and that's typically where that bass is going to be. He's in there, he's looking for a crawdad or a shad to move around those rocks, and this thing really comes through it good, and I'm just kind of swimming along, letting it tick the bottom every once in a while. I hadn't hit her on the fall. Old line just tightened up and it was there. One thing I found about this Zika rig is that when that sinker falls, it falls and your hook and your bait are up here, so it falls down and the bait out to the side almost acts like a keel, so you don't get any line twist like you would with a Texas rig. And you have very little line twist with this deal, especially when you're fishing vertical, you know, pitching it through grass or wood cover or something like that. There he is. Oh, it's a good one. Oh, come in here. I mean, those are line burners now. Oh, come here, baby. Ah, yeah, got you. Look at the size of that toe. Oh, go back and get a little bigger. I'll try again one of these days. What happens here is I'm pitching this Zika rig in around these trees. A lot of times it'll go down over a limb. It just goes straight vertically down to the bottom. And when that sinker hits the bottom, then I'm just sitting there shaking it, and you can see that worm or little beaver bait is just shaking like that. It just looks so real down there around the base of those trees, and that's when those bass are grabbing it. Oh, I knew there'd be a cod molly down there at the bottom of that tree. Come out of there. Yes, he was. He was in there. I mean, he got that old go-to worm and ate it. I'm telling you, that sucker hooks him. It's pronounced Zika, in Japanese, and it's a great way to catch bass. You know, it's just a different alternative approach from a Texas rig. It's got some advantages. I'm not saying it's better all the time in a Texas rig, but it's got some advantages at some time. And really, I've been catching a lot of quality fish on it. I like it.
Sometimes, some of the tournaments that I fished in, it seemed like every fish in the lake was out in 20 or 30 feet of water. I'm going to show you how to get to those fish today in depth. Oh yeah, that's a good fish. Come here, fish. Just swimming like crazy. Get in the boat. Well, that fish right there, he hit it really, really hard. He knocked it slack in it. It's going the other direction. Back out there, buddy. This is the kind of fishing I really like to do. Whenever you're fishing deep water with a swim bait, you know, most people use them in shallow water. Man, it can be a great way to catch fish in really deep water as well, even up to 35 or 40 feet deep. Just the fact that I'm using on a real heavy head, I can get it down to the bottom quick. So check this out today. Hopefully I can teach you a thing or two. Using a swim bait out in deep water is something I really enjoy doing. A lot of people fish with swim baits, but they typically use them in shallower water presentations, you know, less than 10 feet deep anyways. Using a swim bait out in that really deep water, 25, 30, 40 feet deep even, it's really the best way I know to catch those bass that are down there that deep, that are keying on shad. That fish right there ate it too, look at that. That's what you like to see, is when they've got that swim bait all the way down in their mouth. Fishing a swim bait that deep is a technique a lot of fishermen will overlook. The places I'm fishing out there are structure features. You know, if you imagine a point that comes out that's tapering out a long ways and then it breaks off pretty quick on one side and the other side still has a real flat taper to it, that's where those fish are typically going to sit, and they'll use that break to ambush the bait fish. They'll sit out there right off of it and kind of push the bait up against those steeper places. Whenever I'm out there idling those places and looking for those fish, I'm looking for them to be positioned in a certain way. I'm not looking for fish that are way off the side of that structure, suspended out over deep water. Right there, we just idled across this point, and we're out there, you know, it was up about 28, 29 foot, and then right there where it started tapering off. You want to see those fish, you know, we come right off of that break right there, and those fish were sitting there. They weren't on the very top of it, but they were close, which is what you want. Either, I mean, it's good for them to be on the top, but you at least want them to be near the top of the structure. If they're way down there, way off to the side, or suspended out off of it, that's not a good thing. Those fish were close to the bottom. They were right where we want them to be, so we're gonna see if we can catch one. Oh yeah, look at that one. One thing you always want to keep in mind whenever you're fishing this swim bait deep, a lot of times you'll get bit on your initial cast. Whenever you throw that bait out, the kind of fish you like to see right there. Whenever I make a cast, I let it go all the way to the bottom at first, then I'm begin my retrieve. You get a lot of bites a lot of times on that initial cast, on your initial drop. There we go. Pretty good fish, come on up in the boat. Deep water swim bait fish right there. It's another great thing to do with that swim bait. When you're reeling it along, you can just kind of pop it. What I do, I'll throw it out there. I let it go straight to the bottom as soon as it hits the water. And you'll get some bites on the initial drop sometimes. Then after that, I just start a slow, steady retrieve with my reel. About halfway back to the boat, I like to give it a little twitch. Then I let it fall to where it takes the slack back out of my line. And just go back to my slow retrieve. And sometimes they'll be biting it most of the time after that pop, and other times they like it just whenever you're bringing it along. So that's pretty much all I do with it. I'll pop it a couple times coming back, and just kind of a slow roll with it. One of the key factors that you really look at for this time of year as to when you know that this is going to be a good pattern is that a lot of the fish are done spawning. The majority of fish have finished spawning. They're coming back out. They're getting that set up on that deep structure. That's really when this deal gets the best, you know, and that's typically around when the water's at least 70 degrees, 70, 72 degrees. That's when a lot of the fish are going to be done. They're going to be coming out and setting up out on that deeper structure. And this is good all through the summer and really into the fall until the water gets real cold. Late spring, early summer, it doesn't get any better time for deep water swim bait fishing. That fish, I was bringing it right out across that ledge whenever that one bit. Today out here on the lake, what I'm showing you, we're fishing on a lake that's got really big fish in it, and we're fishing there during the peak of the season. Late spring, early summer, those fish are chasing some really big shad. That's not always the case though. You know, late summer or early fall, the bait fish are going to be a lot smaller and you have to downsize your bait. It's really important whenever you're fishing a swim bait to make sure that you match the hatch. That fish hit it 2 or 3 times. Feels like a pretty good one too. Oh yeah. This is the kind of fishing I really like to do. Whenever you're fishing deep water with a swim bait. Stay on there, baby. Yeah, that's a good one. It's another good fish. Get him back in the water. At different times during the day, you know, different presentations with this thing will be better. Anytime that I'm seeing a lot of fish on my graph, I'm always going to drop this bait down there just like you would a jig and spoon. You know, but I'm always going to do that if I'm seeing a lot of fish. And here in the last little bit, I haven't been getting a lot of bites, just casting it. So that's why I'm really focusing a lot of time. If I see fish down there, I'm going to drop it right in front of them. You know that you're going to see it, or that those fish are going to see it, dropping it like that. So anytime you're marking a lot of fish, it's always worth dropping that bait down there right in front of their face. Those red lines are fish. And the lack of red lines means they're gone. You can see the one, that's me. For fishing this swim bait real deep, one thing that's extremely important is to have a big rod. You want a long rod for this because you're going to have to take up a lot of line. You know, you've got, not only are you throwing it out there a long ways with that 1 ounce head, but you're letting it go all the way down to the bottom at 30 or 40 feet of water as well. So the Bass Pro Shop Carbon Light 7.6 heavy action rod. I'm throwing Berkeley Trilene 100% fluorocarbon, 17-pound test, and a Revo Premier bait caster, 6:4 to 1 gear ratio. I don't like the super high speed and the 7-to-1 just because I'm trying to fish the bait fairly slow down there, but that 6.4 is plenty fast enough to take up a lot of line. Fluorocarbon's a must as well. You know, it doesn't have much stretch, but it has just enough so where you don't break those fish off. I'm gonna show you the setup I've been using today. Been using the exact same bait, just a couple different colors. A plain shad pattern, one that's got a little bit of chartreuse and blue in it for showing up when that water's got a little bit of color. The jig head I've been using, I've used a 3/4 ounce a little bit, but primarily used a 1 ounce. It does have a screw-on keeper on the shank. And for a hollow-bellied swim bait, that helps you get a few more fish out of each bait. I pretty much just put the bait up on there, come out of the back about where it should. Just screw it up on that little spring there. It's good to go. One thing with the swim bait, you gotta make sure you get that thing straight. It has to swim straight in the water. You can see that right there. There's some fish right there. And the top of that hump was about 21 feet. Those fish were sitting in 22 to 26, 27 feet. You can see over here on this screen as well that you can see some little white dots off to the side on that side imaging screen. But on my sonar, the only thing that I do to that is I turn the sensitivity up just a little bit. And every boat's a little different in the way your transducer's mounted, but typically turning it up just a little bit is going to give you the readout that you want. You can see right here, right there's a small thing of bait fish. You can see where it comes up on this little old hump right there, right at the top of that, man. That's a good group of fish right there. So, man, that's exactly what you want to see. I'm gonna see if I can't catch one. This technique is somewhat specific to me. You know, lakes that don't have stripers in them really allow this technique to shine. It's not that you can't catch bass this way in lakes that have stripers, but whenever a lake doesn't have those, the largemouth and smallmouth bass are the top of the food chain. There's nothing else out there that they have to worry about eating them. So they can get out and get on those somewhat bare places from cover and get out there, and they just have to worry about the next meal that's coming by for them. They don't have to worry about being somebody else's meal. So all these bait fish that are out here, these big threadfin and big gizzard shad, bass are the only thing that's eating them, and there's nothing out here to eat the bass. If I see fish down there on my screen like I'm doing right now, I know they're bass because they're the king of the water out here on this particular body of water. Oh yeah, there he is. Where you at? And that fish was deep. Look at that, look at that. Golly. Come here. Come here, fish. Oh yeah. Man, that's another good one right there. That fish bit it 4 or 5 times before I ever got it to eat it. Just kept dropping it back. It kept coming back and hitting it again. We'll get back down there, fish. And that fish right there, that's a prime example of what makes that swim bait so effective in deep water. You know, that fish was in about 30 feet or so. With that swim bait with a 1-ounce jig head in it, it gets down to the bottom really quick and it stays down there really well. A lot of other baits, you know, that like a Carolina rig or a Texas rig worm, or even a big jig will get down there quick, but it's hard to imitate a shad with those kind of baits. There's nothing that does better for imitating a shad in deep water than a swim bait. That's how those fish will bite it on the fall. A lot of times that's exactly what that fish did. Well, he really ate that thing too. Look at that. Tell me you didn't think he thought that was a shad. Using a swim bait out in that really deep water is a very effective way to fish. It's really the best way I know to catch those bass that are down there that deep that are keying on shad. Another good chunky fish.
If you're like me, you're really excited to get to that fishing location, but one thing to remember, let your engine warm up before you take off across that lake. Let that thermostat cycle a few times. That'll really ensure the longevity of your engine before you go fishing.
Okay, so you've got all of these rods and reels, but how do you know which rod goes with which reel? Kevin Van Dam will cut through the clutter today on today's Bass School 101. School is now in session.
You know, one thing that a lot of fishermen don't really think about is the gear ratio of their reel. You know, you have 1 or 2 reels, you buy a fast one, you buy a slow one, and you kind of use them for everything. What I try to do is I try to match the gear ratio for the technique to make it the most efficient. You know, I want to have the most casts on the water, and I want to put myself in the best position for that technique with my reel. So I use 3 different gear ratio reels while I'm fishing. You know, if I'm pitching a jig or casting a Carolina rig or throwing a topwater or a jerkbait, I'm always, you know, pitching that bait out there, casting it out there. I'm working it with my rod. I'm dragging it along the bottom with my rod. And really all the reel's doing is picking up slack line. So at the end of my cast, if I pull it out of a tree, I can reel it in real fast and get it to the next target, you know, when I'm throwing this jig like this. Or if I'm working a topwater, you can get it in and get it back into the strike zone real quick. So a lot of techniques, a high speed or a super high speed reel is the way to go. The opposite of that spectrum is for those power techniques where you need a low gear ratio for the power or that winching power, the leverage to throw bigger baits, you know. And first and foremost for me, that's your big deep diving crankbaits, your big spinnerbaits, things like that, lures that have a lot of torque. You can make a cast with those, crank that bait out there, and physically have a much better feel with it because of that lower gear ratio gives you a lot more power with these other techniques. You know, right in the middle of these two, between the low of a power gear ratio like a 5:1 to 1 or a 5:3 to 1 is a 6:2 to 1 or that 6:6 to 1. That reel that brings in, you know, 26, 27 inches of line per turn. That's kind of right in the middle, and that's what I really like you know, for like spinnerbaits, for instance. I can take a spinnerbait with a gear ratio like that. I can cast it out there. I can get a really good feel with it, slow rolling it, or I can run it at a pretty good pace. It's probably the most versatile and the best all around. If you're gonna buy one gear ratio, to buy something kind of right in the middle like that is the way to go. If you match your gear ratio to the technique and the lure that you're fishing, you're gonna be a lot more efficient. Class is dismissed.
Hello everybody, and welcome to America's favorite bass fishing show. We're here at Bass Pro Shops Outdoor World in Lawrenceville near Atlanta, Georgia. Hey, we've got a great show for you today, and you are guaranteed to learn something. In 1984's Bassmaster Classic, Rick Clunn set a record that has never been broken. Today, he takes us to that special location as we go in depth. Then, if you are mystified by what colors to use and when to use them, today is the day you begin to understand. Kevin Van Dam has our Bass School 101. But first, Brian Snowden showed up early and is on a super fun topwater bite in this week's Fishing in 5.
Today we're going to show you one of the most exciting ways to catch bass. That's with a topwater lure. You know, it's a great summertime, early fall pattern, and we're going to show you how we do that today. You know, the key to topwater fishing always seems to be bait, you know, and when you find the bait, and they have been in the backs of the major creeks, moving around a little bit as the weather turns from summer, you know, starts getting a little cooler. The shad migrate back and the fish just follow them, you know, and so a lot of times they're not actually on the cover. They're just milling around those flats looking for those bait fish. You know, when they swim by, they're going to feed on them. And it changes from day to day. You know, one day they seem to be really strong in one back end of a creek, then the next day, you know, it's another back end. So you just got to kind of keep moving around. And, you know, I'm always watching my bait, seeing if I spook any of those shad or if I see any activity on the surface. You know, that really lets me know that there's some fish in the area, bait fish, and usually the bass are right behind them. Right off of that lay down. You know, topwater fishing for bass is one of the most exciting ways to catch them. But you know, one of the things I see a lot of novice anglers do is the first thing, when you get a strike, the first reaction is to jerk immediately. And you actually want to hesitate a little bit to let that fish pull that bait under. So what I always say is wait until you can feel that fish on the end of your rod before you set the hook. And another thing, if you do miss one, a lot of guys will stop the bait. That's usually the wrong thing to do. 9 out of 10 times, what you want to do is when you miss that strike, either speed the bait up, but definitely keep it moving. If you stop that bait, most of the time they will not come back and strike it again. So one of the things, give them a few seconds, let them load up on your rod before you set the hook. And if you miss one of those fish, keep that bait moving so he'll come back and get it again. Well, this morning, you know, it's been one of the coldest nights we've had, and I've had several bites that have just came up and moved the bait, swirled on it, but not taken it. There we go. There's one that got it. Oh, we got him jumping. Ooh. You know, we were talking earlier about the shad movement and stuff, and we've had a really cold night last night, and missed several fish on the bait this morning. And I think, you know, a lot of times it just has to do with the fish getting warmed up a little bit. 1 or 2 degrees can make all the difference in the world. So we'll see how the day progresses. You know, beginning topwater anglers have a little bit of difficulty sometimes learning how to walk the dog or use a Zara spook correctly. You know, it's definitely a rhythm thing because you're actually wanting to work the bait with the rod, not the reel, but you have to reel at the same time to constantly pick up some of that slack line. So it's a motion with the rod to cause the bait to move from side to side. And as that bait moves from side to side, there's a little hesitation in between the reels. When you get it right, you know, you can actually work that bait real easy side to side, and you're just picking up that loose line with the reel. Once you've mastered the basic walking the dog, You can start playing with your cadence to actually make the bait move toward or away from pieces of cover. By just changing the amount of time you let the bait move from one side to another, you can actually make that bait go left or right. So you can come close to a target or actually away from a target. If you're coming around trees or stumps, you can actually bring that bait right into it just by lengthening one side of the cadence and shortening the other. And this will allow you to be very efficient in covering water with your spook and keeping it out of the cover. Got it. He was out in the middle of nowhere. Look at that. Nice largemouth. Let's get him in here. Now that is almost a midday topwater fish. As you can see, good quality. It is actually 10-15. Bright sunny conditions, hardly any wind. But you know, we had a lot of bait present in this pocket. We kept talking about that. It was key. You know, I kept saying I can't imagine why we haven't got a bite yet. But we finally got one out of that. You know, I don't know if he was in a tree, just out off of that tree, but you know, it just goes to show you that a topwater bait will work throughout the day if you just give it a chance and stay around that bait.
When Rick Clunn won the Classic back in 1984, he was on the Arkansas River near Pine Bluff, Arkansas. Today, he takes us back to that special location where he caught nearly 76 pounds in 3 days. Here is this week's In Depth.
This was my second day of practice here at the Pine Bluff Classic in 1984. I had fished the first day up in one of the more famous areas at that time called Brody Bend. I decided to stay in here. I always had this habit, and I always have, of trying to go to where I don't think a lot of people would be fishing, something outside the box, the road less traveled, whatever you want to call it. And I just tried to work down, and I noticed this significant little ledge. As you'll see in here, you don't really see a lot of, especially back then, what fishermen looked at as pretty fishing water, standing stumps, lily pads, cypress trees, which a lot of these pools down there have that kind of beautiful water. And so I picked up my crankbait, just like I'm gonna do right now. I'm gonna go back that same crankbait, a Model A bomber, that I found those fish with and then end up catching the majority of them on. We're just gonna kind of relive that this morning. I'm going to fish down through here, fish that ledge, and just see what happens. The ledge change is not real pronounced until we get down to about that point. And when I got to that point, it's when I really noticed, because I'm zigzagging in and out. I haven't fished here before. I don't know what the bottom structure is. We didn't have GPS and all that sophisticated stuff. They're still hard to find maps for this part of the river, even today. Like I said, I'd practiced one day here already, and I caught scattered fish, but I hadn't caught anything that appeared to be grouped up. And right down here, all of a sudden I caught a 2-pounder, then I caught a 5-pounder, then I caught a 2-pounder, and really kind of left it. I didn't really want to fish it anymore. I didn't want, you know, other anglers to see me practicing on it. So I left it and really didn't come back to it until the very last day of practice. Again, back then we could practice a month ahead of time, then it went off limits. And so the last day of official practice here, before we would come back in the Classic a month later, I went back to it, and I immediately caught a 4-pounder, and I left it. Never went back to it even in the 2 days of practice. When we got back to the Classic, we get 2 days of practice, and then the tournament would be a 3-day tournament. I never even came close to it. I did go and fish some other waters that had that similar depth, that similar pattern, just to try to confirm in my mind that the fish were really still eating this little shallow crankbait on these shallow ledges. And I caught enough fish to give me the confidence that, yeah, they were still in that kind of water, but I really didn't know if they were going to be here until the first day of the tournament. And then after that, when I fished first day of the tournament, everything else became history after that. I ended up catching a little over 24 pounds that first day, 7 fish. And second day I had 7 that weighed 23, and then last day I had 7 that weighed 28. I really didn't know what I'd found. You know, when I came here a month earlier and I pulled up here, caught those fish, You never know if you come back 2 weeks later, even 3 weeks later, 4 weeks later, if they're going to be there. So honestly, I did not know what I'd found until the tournament was over.
I found these fish back almost 3 weeks ago, fishing Model A bomber. And I was fishing in the harbor. I never went over 3 miles from where we put in. That's the funny thing about this sport. You really never know until it's finished who's going to win. I hope to have a pretty good lead going in tomorrow and don't have to do as much. That's kind of been my strategy, is to get a big enough lead so I don't have to do a whole lot that last day. And I hope that's what's happened, but only time will tell. Only time will tell. Only time will tell. Only time will tell. Let's get it for it, folks. Come on, everybody, stand up. This is the broke all the record. 27 pounds, 7 ounces. Ricky Carr.
So this spot was just kind of well hidden from the trained eyes of fishermen that we're always going into an area like this, and the minute we drive in here, we're going, good spot, bad spot, good spot, bad spot, good spot. These are just opinions on our part, but that's the way fishermen work. They see standing timber over, that's good. Lily pads, that's good. Riprap, that's good. But you come in here, it's kind of hard to see any of that kind of stuff. So if you're not into depth finders, and you got to remember, 1984, there wasn't GPS. There wasn't. We were still probably using, mostly us guys were using flashers. We didn't have down scan, side scan, all this kind of things that people now could come in here and they don't see anything with their naked eye, but then they start using all this other equipment, and they might then start to determine, hey, this is better than it looks from the surface. Hey, buddy. Oh. You know I knew your great-granddad. Did you know that? Maybe great-great-granddad. I don't know for sure. Yes, you can see still this area, good areas stay good as long as the environment stays good, the food's there. Like I said, it may never be at the quality of place that it was back then, but it still produces. Most people have asked me, will anybody ever beat that record? And I said, probably not in July and August. I can only think of one lake in this whole country that would even have a chance in July and August. But now they moved the classic to February and March. And I thought by now it would have been broken in February and March, because there's 20, 30 lakes in this country that in February and March you could catch 75 pounds in 3 days. It hadn't happened yet, but still, this is, again, July and August, 75 pounds in 100-degree weather. That makes this place even more special.
If you were to ask the best bass anglers on tour what is their favorite lure, they're going to tell you a crankbait, not only for big bass, but also when they're going after a tournament victory. And I'm going to tell you, of all the Bassmasters Classic, that tournament in 1984 that Rick Clunn broke all of those records goes down as the most dominating performance of all time.
We've made, half a dozen passes down through here using the traditional baits that I won the Classic in '84, and now using some baits that I would like to have then. I'm not surprised, this spot's probably the heaviest fished water in here, and probably to catch a good string now, you really probably have to leave this spot and start fishing other types of patterns and covering more water. That's really probably going to be the key, is fishing water that's got fish in it, because this area has a lot of fish in it, but fishing more the way Dr. Greg South fished in 1984, where he was fishing topwater in the morning and crankbaits in the middle of the day and plastic worms, but he was moving around where I wasn't moving around at all. So we're going to start doing more of that other, because really today that's the way you'd have to fish. This place is, you'll catch a few fish like you saw, but would they even be the kind of fish you'd need if you were fishing a tournament? Probably not. Like the Native American Indian said, "Ake wachia kinte." See, the Lakotas don't have a word for goodbye. They just say, until we meet again. So I'm just going to tell my old friend here, until we meet again. got the river here is, you know, this is 2012. In 1984, the river was muddy, not muddy, but off color, and the backwaters were a little bit clearer. The backwaters are about the color they were back then, but the river now is actually clearer than the backwater. They don't hit them as easily, and so two things now to me dictate fishing smaller bait is the clearer water, and secondly, the amount of pressure we have now in 2012 on river systems versus what we had in 1984. I think it's too shallow for the freak though. A lot of this water goes up to 4 and then back down to 14, up to 4, back down to 14, and if you throw this bait up in 4, it's just gonna plow a cornfield. You know, the cast that was catching the fish, I would get the bait just started. This bait dies pretty fast, pretty quick, but it's really about an 8 to 10 foot bait. About 2 or 3 cranks, I'd be hitting the bottom, so I knew then I was in that shallower water. And actually, it really just kind of digs its way out through that sand, and then finally when it would kind of get to where it would start to drop off is when the fish would eat it. That's more like what this river produced when I was here in '84. But that's kind of the way fishing is this time of year. You can spend hours, it's feast or famine. I mean, you can literally spend hours and hours looking for them. And that's typical summer fishing too. You know, it's that kind of fishing. There's a group of fish here, and it's the kind of spot that you need to find because there were several busting on that. Normally that river is fairly off color and the backwaters are clear, but kind of the opposite right now. The backwaters have a little bit of, you know, clarity, but the river's really getting clear due to the lack of rain this year. So finally he decided to come back in the harbor here and fish deeper, which is something nobody really realized would work in this harbor back in 1984. And that's really what started to work for us. You know, these fish were not really deep, but they were out in near deep water in the middle of the harbor on these little shallow ledges dropping into 8 to 15 foot. Very similar really to how I caught mine in 1984, you know, sitting up in 2 to 3 foot, dropping into 8 to 12. And when I was catching the fish, I felt the bait really digging in the bottom, and then it'd come off the lip, and boom, you'd have one of those fish. So again, they weren't deep. They were near deep water this time. So it was similar in that respect, but I don't think any of these fish that we've caught today, or you would catch in a tournament this time frame would not be fish that would hold up like those did back in 1984. You'd probably have to have 2 or 3 spots like I found today, and fish them over a 3-day period.
Hey, here's a fast fact for you. I'm headed down to Florida going to do a little fishing, and I know I'm going to be around a lot of vegetation. So I want to give you guys my tip for fishing plastics around vegetation. Guys, I don't like a ribbon tail. This worm is great for rocky situations or anything I want a lot of visual action. But let's face it, that ribbon is going to grab in that grass and not allow that lure to fall. I like something like a straight tail worm or a crawl that doesn't have those ribbon type features. It's going to allow it to go through that grass. You're going to give all the action you need, and it's going to allow it to get down there where those bass are. Black, red, green, blue, yellow, chartreuse. Of all these colors, which ones would you choose? Kevin Van Dam tells us his secrets in color selection in today's Bass School 101. Class is now in session.
Hey, I think just like all bass fishermen, I'm fascinated by lure colors. You know, you're always looking for that magic one, the one that's going to catch the fish on that given day. You know, lure color to me is something that I choose based on the water clarity and the sky conditions and the predominant forage in the system. If you don't know what the predominant forage is, I got a simple system that'll help you pick the right color lure on that given day. Dirty water, it's probably not near as important. You know, in that situation, I want to have a color that's the most visible and natural in the circumstances. So if the water's real dirty and I'm fishing a bait that's up off the bottom, I want to use a bright color, you know, to imitate a bait fish, a shad, things like that that are going to be very visible. So, you know, if I'm throwing a shallow running crankbait and fishing it up like that, chartreuse, pearl white, you know, bright colors like this are going to be really, really effective. You know, if I'm fishing down near the bottom, I want dark colors, colors that are going to silhouette in that dirty water. Black, dark red, colors like that. Now if you go out and you got a clear water situation, you can see down 2, 3, 4 feet or even more in the lake. That's where color becomes really, really, really critical. And the fish can really home in on a certain hue. That's where it really makes a difference. So, you know, if you're out there and you're fishing and clear water situation and you see the bass chasing bluegills, it's hard to beat to match the hatch with that bluegill colored crankbait. Or if they're on shad in clear water, a translucent natural shad pattern like this is going to be really, really effective for them. So, you know, I want to try to look at the water clarity and pick something that's going to match the forage if possible. If you don't know what the forage is, what I try to do is I choose a color that blends in with the cover or the background that I'm fishing. So what I mean by that is if you're going down a rocky bank and you see that the rocks are brown and you're throwing something up there in the rocks, throw a brown color, because the crayfish and the minnows that are there are going to be just like a chameleon and blend in with that surroundings. If you're fishing green weeds, throw green. If you're fishing sand, throw a sand color. Everything in nature is built to blend in with its surroundings. So remember, if you got dirty water, you want to use bright colors, colors that are going to be very visible for the situation, or colors that are dark and going to silhouette in that stained water. In clear water, just the opposite. You want natural colors that match the hatch, colors that blend in with the surroundings. Remember these couple things and you're going to catch a lot more fish. That's it. Class dismissed.
Hello everyone, we're coming to you today from the granddaddy of all outdoor stores, Bass Pro Shops in Springfield, Missouri. Turn it up, I guarantee you're going to learn something. Today, Kevin Van Dam is taking us to Michigan's Lake St. Clair, and he's going to show us how to drift in the current with a killer drop shot rig. It's coming up on In Depth. Then, Edwin Evers has prepared an all-new lesson that will definitely put more fish in your boat. It's today's Bass School 101. But first, if you thought getting a crankbait down to 25 or even 35 feet was impossible, Tim Horton shows us how long lining makes it easy. It's today's Fishing in 5.
One of the new hot techniques taken over the country is a technique called long lining. Long lining gets its name because what you're doing is making a cast, then getting either on the big engine or your trolling motor and letting out a lot of line. What you're able to do is reach depths that you've never reached before with a deep diving crankbait. You can reach depths of 25, 35, 40 feet with a crankbait that normally on a long cast would only run 15 or 20 foot. The beauty of the reason that this thing works is you can cover a lot of water quickly. Let's face it, when we're fishing a jig or a spoon or swimming a grub, typical lures that we've used at those depths, it takes a lot of time to be able to cover that water. Now we can get down in that strike zone quickly and effectively with these crankbaits that we all love to fish. Hey guys, before getting out and competing in an event long lining, make sure that it's legal with your tournament directors. There's a thing that we're not allowed to do in big tournaments, and that's trolling. So make sure when you're moving, you're letting line out and not moving that lure with your trolling motor or your big engine. And make sure you get your foot off the trolling motor or off the big engine before you engage that reel. I'm gonna tell you, 23, 25, all the way down to 27 foot of water on a deep diving crankbait. You couldn't do it before, now you can with long lining. Let's get another one. What I like to do is graph around and look for these fish the same as I was if I was casting to them. But in the summertime, these fish will move out a lot deeper, 25, 35 foot. Some lakes even 45 foot. So when I'm finding fish at those depths, I know I've got to let out a lot of line. And guys, it's basic geometry. Let's face it, when we make a long cast and that crankbait's diving down, it would keep going if we had a lot of line out. But once that line starts shortening up, that crankbait has to start coming back to the surface. Long lining, that does not happen. Your bait is in the strike zone for a long time. In another term, if you think about a parabolic curve, when that turn starts happening and there's only a certain amount of line out, it's going to have to start coming back to the boat. Now, we're able to increase our cast by getting on the trolling motor and letting out line. When we engage the reel and start that retrieve, we're going to reach depths that we've never reached before with a deep diving crankbait. One thing that's going to be different is your gear ratio when you let out all this line. If you've got a reel that's normally 6/4 to 1 and you make a long cast, you're only losing about 1/3 of that line. So when you engage the reel, you're going to reel faster than you normally would on a cast. As the lure starts getting closer to the boat, slow down and use your normal retrieve. Now, it's important that you leave that lure sitting still as you're on the trolling motor getting distance between you and the lure, because if that lure is coming in with you, you're really defeating your purpose. So you want to leave it out there at the furthest point from where you are and where that lure is. When you engage that reel, you've got a lot of line to let out, and that's going to let that lure get down deep. And hey guys, you can't reel these lures too fast. A bass can swim at 22 miles per hour. They're going to be able to chase down any crankbait you're reeling in.
Oh, that's a good one. That's a good one.
One thing that's important in this technique is bass get accustomed to seeing certain lures at certain depths. Now they're seeing crankbaits and it's something they've never seen, and it's going to trigger strikes that you normally would not have gotten.
Good one. A lot of fight in that joker.
In using this long lining technique, basic deep cranking equipment is what you're going to want. Number 7 fat-free shad, big 6/4 to 1 loose bait casting reel, and a ducket cranking rod. Now, one thing that's real important, keep your spool full of line. And in this technique, I don't use backing down in my reel. I want the line that's going to be on here all the way to the spool, because you're letting out 100 to 150 yards on each retrieve.
1, 2, 3.
Oh, guys, this is ready to go. Hey guys, 23, 25, even 35 foot of water, long lining. Never before could you have caught that fish on a deep diving crankbait. Now you can.
Controversial on the tournament trail? You bet. An effective way to catch them? No doubt.
Up next, 6-time Angler of the Year, Kevin Van Dam, finds that drifting a drop shot rig and floating along with the current is a great way to put a limit of bass in the boat. It's today's In Depth.
There's one right there. Yep. Yep. Oh, I love the sound of that braid on there. It's a good solid one. These fish get up in here and really feed when they're fighting that current like that. Look at that. Little drop shot rig, slipping with the current. You know, it's a great way to catch fish. You know, I mean, up here in the north, you know, we've got a lot of rivers and things like that, and I've used this technique, you know, a lot up here, but I've used it all over the country too. The great thing about when you've got current is it really positions the fish down near the bottom. You know, they can't just sit halfway up through the water column or something like that. So they're going to be down near the bottom. And you know, you can let line out and drag along and catch fish like that, but the best way is to get right over the top of them. And I learned this fishing for walleyes, really jigging for walleyes up north. And you know, if you just get right over the top of them and fish, there's another one right there. Small one, but boy, they're down there. And you can look right with your depth finder and see where those fish are right at. And you can just get right over the top of them, get a perfect presentation to them. With this drop shot rig, it's holding that bait just right up off the bottom, and it's right in their face. They're facing up current, you're jigging it along right on, you get great bottom contact, and it's just a tremendous way to catch fish. I've done it from, you know, way down south to way up north. Anytime I've got a river situation with strong current, whether it's Kentucky Lake or up here in the Great Lakes, it's something that I'm always going to look for. What we've got here is, you know, a pretty strong current. I mean, it's 4 or 5 miles an hour. You can see the bank moving along. And all I do is I just watch my depth finder for depth. And, you know, I'm looking for any irregularities and stuff out here in the channel. But I'm trying to use my trolling motor just so that I'm keeping my bait and my sinker right beneath me, you know, and that's the critical thing. You know, based on the depth and the current speed, you use just enough weight to keep it just bobbling along the bottom so you get good bottom contact and you can keep it vertical. You don't want a big bow in your line, you don't want it dragging down through there, and I'll use just enough trolling motor to keep that bait right beneath me. And, you know, with a system like this, you just get tremendous feel. You can tell exactly what the bait's doing and when you get a bite down there. There we go. The whole key to this technique is keeping that bait straight above the fish like that. And another thing that I think really helps is using braided line. You know, I'm using 10-pound test Power Pro here, and then I've got a swivel above it and a leader. And, you know, with that setup there, you know, I've got the clear fluorocarbon down there where the bait's at. I've got a swivel up here, and what that braid does is it gives you tremendous sensitivity, so you can feel exactly what's going on. The other real key advantage to that braid is that it is very small in diameter, and what's really important is that you don't get a big bow in your line with the current. You know, here where the current's fast like this, if you use bigger diameter line, or if you're using fluorocarbon or monofilament, you tend to get a lot more drag on the line, and you get a big bow in it, and you can't feel as well, and you just don't get the good hookups like you need to have in this situation. So, you know, I'm going to drop it straight down there with that braid, let it go all the way to the bottom, and then just use my trolling motor and just slowly hop that thing up and down on the bottom so it's right vertical and it's right there in the fish's face. You know, I just adjust the length of that leader to the sinker based on how far I want it off the bottom. Right now I want it so it's just swimming down through there, and again, it's just like a normal situation where bait is being swept down through by this current, and those smallmouth are just sitting down there waiting for something to go by. So I'm just kind of shaking it along, keeping it straight over the top, and every now and then one will bite it. You know, right now I'm using a drop shot, but you know, you can use other baits for this. I've had a lot of success fishing a tube too with a heavy jig head this way. What I really like about a drop shot though, especially if I'm fishing a river that's got a lot of rough bottom, you know, big rocks and things, is by keeping that line tight and having that sinker just dribbling along the bottom like that, you keep such good contact with this braid that your sinker's not falling in the cracks of those rocks. So, you know, if it's a rockier bottom, it works a lot better. You know, I do that a lot below dams and things like that where there's just tons of rocks, there's lots of current, and you don't want that, you know, that sinker constantly swept into the bottom. So it's critical in that situation that you use just enough weight to keep bottom contact so that that bait is just ticking along the bottom.
I've been wind drifting and current drifting with soft plastic baits and jigs for years and years. And since the drop shot has got so popular, you know, it's a great tool to use in that situation. It really keeps your bait in the potential strike zone for a long period of time, and that's going to help you catch a lot of fish.
You can hear, I mean, we've got a pretty good wind blowing, and it's blowing right with the current. So it really speeds things up a lot, and it kind of changes the flow. It's a small one there. So, you know, that's something that you really got to think about, is how the wind is pushing current across spots like this. So that's why the fish are here, though. I mean, the current is what positions them down there. It keeps them down near the bottom. And you see the same thing on river run lakes like Kentucky Lake. You know, when you see the wind blowing along with the current, that's a great time to get out off the points on some of those deeper flats in the river channel itself. And if you start marking fish on your graph, that's where this technique like this with a drop shot is perfect for it. There we go. The wind makes it a little bit harder to feel. That's where that braid really comes in handy, because it just is electric down there. You can feel every time that bait hits the bottom and one grabs it like that. The little ones are hard to keep on. There we go. Decent one, but all sizes through here. Right now, I'm putting this big profile rodent on there, trying to get a bigger bite. There's a bunch of fish in this area. There's a few good ones mixed in. So, you know, something like this, it's got a flat side to it and it just has tremendous action. But this small profile bait, I'm just catching a bunch of little fish with it. So that's why I went to this bigger bait, see if we couldn't catch a little bigger fish, and it's starting to work. So we'll keep trying through here. You know, you have to cover a lot of these areas to find that magic spot, and a lot of times I'll see the bass on the graph down there, and other times it's just a matter of, you know, going through there and getting the fish to actually bite it. You know, you're not going to see every single one that you go over the top of. And this is a technique that works. You know, right now I'm fishing deeper, you know, 22 to 30 foot of water, but I've done this as shallow as 6 and 8 foot. You know, you don't have to have deep water for this technique to work. When you got current like this, and especially if there's a little color in the water, you can get right over the top of the fish and they won't even know you're there. There we go. There's a better one. Bigger bait, a little bigger fish. Crazy how that is, but these smallmouths here especially, they're really looking for those bigger gobies and alewives and stuff at times, so. Not even as big as I thought, but good chunk. It's a good one, good start. Let me give you a little closer look at this rig that I'm using here. What I've got is, the first thing I do is take a fluorocarbon leader, 8 or 10 pound test line, and I've got a little 2/0 Mustad edge hook. If you look real close, it's got a little keeper right up there at the top of it, a little barb, and that keeps your bait from sliding down. So I tie that on with a Palomar hook, and right now I'm threading on a full-size 4-inch rodent. Put that up over the barb, run that all the way through, and, you know, about a foot and a half above it, I've got a little number 16 black swivel. I've got it tied to my main 10-pound test braid, and then I've got about a 12-inch leader to a 1/2 ounce drop shot weight. And a tungsten weight, I think, really enhances your feel. So, you know, with that braid, that short little piece of fluorocarbon right there, and that tungsten weight, you can feel every little pebble, every rock, everything that's down there on the bottom. And that's important. As you make a big drift like this, or you're fishing through a big area of river, you can find the hard and soft spots that way. And again, it just keeps that bait moving right along in the current, just up off the bottom, right in the fish's line of sight. There's a good one right there. It's a little harder to feel them with this wind, but nice one. You know, people think of drop shotting, they just think of finesse worms. You know, there's so many baits that you can put on there. I catch them with a rodent, I catch them with a tube, I catch them with a dream shot, I catch them with a caffeine shed. Lots of different shapes you can catch them with. You know, if they're feeding on crawfish down on the bottom, I'll shorten that leader up and use a bait like this. That's very much a crawdad looking bait. So keep an open mind when you're fishing this rig, and man, it catches them. You know, when you got current like this, it's so efficient. You know, our electronics are so good now that you can see so much down there. You just dropping it right on their nose. There we go. Pretty good one, I think. Feels like a good one. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I love fishing this way. Any chance that I get where I've got river current like this or strong wind, I love to get right over the top of them. You know, you get pinpoint positioning with your boat, you can see the electronics, and you can feel everything with that sinker down there on the bottom. It's a great way to catch them.
Here's a fast fact for you. I've never had an accident in 35 years of fishing. The closest I ever come was in the fog. Fog is the only thing in the water that really does scare me. We have good technology nowadays. We have GPS, and used correctly, it can be very helpful. But too many people use it incorrectly, and they think it's radar. It's not radar. You still got to go very, very slow in the fog and use your common sense.
Grinding it out year after year on the tournament trail for 15 years is bound to teach you a thing or two about bass fishing. Here's Edwin Evers in today's Bass School 101. Class is now in session.
Hey guys, I'm right here in the back of a Bass Pro Shops in their service center, and I'd like to visit with you about a few of the things that I think are really important to ensure the longevity of your bass boat. And that's what to do when you go to winterize it. And these are going to be a few of the steps that I think you need to take, whether you do it yourself or you take it here to one of these service centers. I think something that's really important when you go to store your boat any time of the year, especially in the winter, is to add a stabilizer to it, one with ethanol treatment. The ethanol in today's fuels can eat away your fuel lines in older motors, your fuel pump. It can gum up your carburetor. It can just cause a big mess and a big repair bill the next time you take your boat out. It's important when you put it in to measure the right amount to the amount of fuel that you got in your boat and to run your engine. Get it through that system in the engine so it'll be on those fuel lines, fuel pump, for when you're storing it. I know this may be simple, but don't forget to get all the water out of your boat and your motor when you go to store it. I like to jack the front of my boat up. That'll get all the water to the back of that bilge area, and then pull that plug. Make sure it's all out. I don't want any water on my aerator, my bilge pumps, any of that stuff down there that could freeze and bust. And then be sure you store your motor in a vertical position to drain all that water out so nothing can freeze. Another very important thing to check is your lower unit. Throughout the year, you should take your prop off, make sure there's no line, trot lines, anything behind there that can eat that seal up and get water in there. The oil down here is very important. You need to change that at least once a year, and you should check it throughout the year also. You've got a drain plug usually located right here, behind the prop or on the other side, and you've got a vent hole right here. You've got to open that so it can all get out. Get it changed, and you'll be ready to go the following year. Don't forget about your batteries. It's important to have a good battery maintainer hooked up throughout the off season so they'll be ready to go. I've hit a few of the highlights to winterize your boat. By no means is this everything. You can take your boat to the local tractor service center and they'll have your boat ready for you when the fish are biting.
Hey everybody, and welcome to Concord, North Carolina, home of the beautiful Bass Pro Shops outdoor world. We've got a great show planned for you today, and I guarantee you're going to learn something. So let's get it started. You know when bass are clinging to cover, that's a pattern you can repeat all over the whole lake. Edwin Evers is going to show us how he does it around bridge piers in this week's In Depth. Then, Stacy King is one of the most knowledgeable anglers that's ever fished. I've looked up to him since I was just a little kid. He's got a few things to tell us in this week's Bass School 101. But first, we're going to ride with Rick Clunn. He's going way up a river, and he's going to teach us a few things about river fishing tactics this week's Fishing in 5.
We're on the Arkansas River. We're going to be basically fishing the Arkansas River, a river system. And river systems I like, even though they sometimes can be pretty tough, especially this time of year, July and August. But I like them because they're really fairly simple once you figure them out, how to fish them. The number one thing that I look for in any river system is where can the fish spawn, that nursery system that you have to have anywhere to have a good population of fish. You got to have a good, spawning areas. And in river systems, that's really kind of controlled by the backwaters. The main channel, rarely, unless it's a spotted bass or something, can they really reproduce out there very well, because you're going to get those floods, and those floods are going to blow everything out and blow the nest out, or even if they hatch, blow the little fish out. So the key in any river system for that nursery effect is these big backwaters where you don't get much flow through even in floods, and the fish really have a good opportunity to spawn. So that's the number one thing I look for. We're fishing in one of those big backwaters this morning. The other thing that you got to remember fishing river systems, and I love this because it really makes fishing fairly easier, is that the fish really don't go very deep any time of the year. And so I always keep in my brain when I haven't fished a river in a while that there's no such thing as too shallow in the river, and there really isn't. Sometimes you can catch a 4 or 5 pounder right up in the bank and 6 inches of water. But I'll kind of show you some casts here on there. That walkway right now is keeping me from getting all the way to the bank, but right there is about where every cast should be. Just like that. Good start. And that's what I said, you know, in these rivers, sometimes this first 2 hours is the whole key to your whole day. Usually there's going to be another bite in the middle of the day, but by then it's hot and you're tired. But in the mornings, you know, a real key is this first couple of hours of getting on a bite. The blade I prefer most for water displacement is the long drop. It's really a hybrid blade, kind of a cross between a willow leaf and an Indiana. You know, the spinnerbaits, really the whole key is not the skirt, not the pretty head, or you know, all those type of things. It's really the blade. I designed a bait here about 10 years ago called the long drop blade, because I fished the willow leaf before it, and then I fished the Indiana. And really, I finally said, dang, why can't I combine both the qualities of both the willow leaf and the Indiana blade together? And that's when I came up with the long drop blade. It's simply long like the willow leaf is, but it has an Indiana body to it. And so I get a lot of water displacement. This willow leaf and this long drop are about the same size. The water displacement on that willow leaf is about 1/4 of what this long drop water displacement is. And that's really the whole key. To get the same water displacement, you have to go to a number 7 willow leaf, where in this thing and go to about 4.5 and get a lot of water displacement. I don't get the helicopter effect in the wind because it's a smaller blade. And so I'm accomplishing really a lot of things with the long drop, and it's pretty much just the blade I fish exclusively now. Really, if you don't want to fight the heat, I just suggest, you know, fishing that first 2 to 3 hours in the morning. But really, again, the thing that's most important to remember if you're fishing a river, especially one you're not familiar with, go into your bigger backwaters. Again, what I call the nursery areas, because rivers are very dependent upon these backwaters that are somewhat stable, even in flooded conditions, for their spawn to be able to keep the population good in those around the river. And go in those areas, you know, and fish early. And the other thing is, river systems that fish, keep reminding yourself, there's no such thing as too shallow. Once we lost our visibility this morning and the sun came out, got high over the trees, we went to the RC Squared Series 3 crankbait. It's just one of my favorite baits in river systems. Again, these fish a little shallow. Most of these fish is in 1 to 4 foot of water. This is the perfect size. There's a lot of bait fish in here that are this size, and then it runs the right depth. And then again, it's my favorite crankbait in river systems for square bills. Anytime you're cranking a lure that's on a tight line, you need to be fishing the glass rod. You don't need that sensitivity. In fact, the sensitivity will hurt you. The fish is inhaling the bait. It has a chance to actually inhale the bait before you react. The graphite rods, actually you feel them the minute they start to inhale the blade changes, the vibration of the crankbait changes, and you're actually starting to react at the same time the fish is inhaling. So there's this tug of war between you and the fish before it ever goes in its mouth. That's what a glass allows you. You don't feel it as quick. The fish inhales it, boom, you got him. Good one. Gotta get there. Come here, fish. See, that would call some of those little ones I caught this morning.
Sometimes you can develop a pattern that's easily repeated over the whole lake. You can go to different places on the lake and find areas that look similar and pull up to them and catch fish. Today, Edwin Evers is going to take us in depth and show us how it's done on bridge piers.
One of the best all-time fish holding properties on any body of water, east coast, west coast, north to south, is bridge pilings. That's a nice one. That fish was suspended right there. You can't even see my jig. He's warm too, you can just tell water temperature's really warm. Nice chunky bass though. Today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about bridge pilings. They just offer a tremendous amount of shade. They offer a great current break. They offer habitat for all sizes and species of fish, you know, from shad to minnows to crappie to bass. And they provide shade all day long. They're just awesome fish holding structures. You know, there's a lot of different types. You've got open types where there's maybe 2 separate pilings, or then you got solid kind like that one where it's, you know, solid all the way through. Just really good fish holding properties about bridge pilings. Bridge pilings are so good for a lot of reasons. You know, they hold fish year round, but in the summertime, like what we have right here, the middle of July, I've got shade and I've got a current break that those fish can relate to. A bridge piling can be anywhere from 2 foot of water to, I fish some that are in 100 foot of water, and that fish can just go up and down in that water column right next to that bridge piling and find where he's the most comfortable. Oh, yeah. It's a Kentucky. That's one thing you'll catch a bunch of on bridge pilings is Kentuckies. Spotted bass also, some people call it. That's what I like. Good reason there to be paying attention. You know, a lot of times you'll get bites before your bait ever gets to the bottom, whether it's on a log or bridge piling like what we got right here. You know, that fish ate it before it ever got to the bottom. It's very important to have that bait fall directly next to that bridge piling on your cast. You want that bait to fall just right against it. And the reason is that that's an easier prey for a bass. When they have something to pin a bait up against, they're that much more apt to go after it. And if your bait's away from it, well, if they're not really in a hungry mood, they're not gonna go after it as much as if that bait's up against that concrete. With that said, also fish out away from those bridge pilings. You know, there's times where those fish are roaming underneath shad, or they're relating to the shade that a bridge makes. You know, that shade changes as the sun angles change. A lot of times those fish will suspend under balls of bait out in the shade away from a bridge piling. You know, they can be down 10, 15, 20 foot underneath balls of bait, you know, where that shade is. There's a good one. Oh, yeah. Tell they need to eat it right there. It's a nice fat Kentucky. Get a hold of you. Long. Something about the Kentuckies are a bit long and lean here. Get my jig out. There we go. One of the biggest keys on bridge pilings is to figure out what depth those fish are holding. Very important. Count your bait down. You know, if it's 20 foot, I want to still be counting it the entire time it's falling to figure out what depth they're at, then be able to duplicate that on your next cast or your next fish. Those fish are going to vary from morning to evening, from every day, you know, this week to next week, on what depth those fish are holding at relating to that bridge piling. I think those fish are suspended. I'm going to try a crankbait. Just when my jig's going past them, I'm getting quite a few bites suspended. So I'm gonna try a crankbait on them. One that'll dive about the depth that I think they're going. Ready? Bridge pilings are a natural current break, and you want to pay attention to the upstream side, the downstream side, you know, just where your bite comes from, you know, just depending on which way the current's going, you know, if you have wind or, you know, natural current from the lake. But just, I always try to, there's another one right there. I just always try to, oh, that's a big one too. Golly. That's a good one. Stay on there, fish. Stay on there. You just barely hooked. Come here, buddy. Gotcha. Gotcha, gotcha. I like it. I like it. I popped that bait free off that bridge piling. Man, he inhaled it. Big, long, lean fish. Look at that thing. That's fun.
Fishing bridges can be especially productive throughout the late summer and early fall. But one thing you want to keep in mind is that not all bridges are created the same. You want to keep in mind whether how much current that bridge has, the size of it, or whether it's located on the main lake or back in a creek. You got to take all those things into consideration when you're trying developing a pattern with the bridges.
A great thing about bridge pilings is it is a current break. If you're on a tidal, body of water, you've got a current break with the incoming tide, you got a current break with the outgoing tide. In a lake, it's a current break with big heavy winds, or it's a current break even just with the natural flow through the lake or even a river. It's just a perfect place for a bass to get behind that bridge piling, whatever direction that tide's coming from, and ambush its prey. A bridge piling being such a great current break, it also traps big logs and laydowns, things that are floating down the river. It's a perfect place to trap it. You just don't have a bridge piling. You'll have a big tree or logs washed into these bridge pilings from current. This one here is above the water, but with your electronics, you'll find a bunch of these below the water. They can be, if you got bridge pilings in 100 foot of water, you can have some stuff down there 40, 50 foot or 20 foot down below the surface. Just because you don't see one doesn't mean there's not one trapped up against those bridge pilings. It's just a great fish attractant as a bridge piling, plus it stops all that debris that adds to it and just makes it that much better. A neat thing about bridge pilings is you're not limited to one bait or one depth. Those fish can hold right at the surface. They can hold 10 foot down and catch them with a crankbait, or they can hold all the way on the bottom and you catch them with a jig or a jigging spoon or a drop shot. So don't be keyed in to just fishing the bottom or fishing a crankbait. Mix it up. A great thing about bridge pilings, they provide shade all day long. With that shade, don't be afraid to throw like a Zara spook or a buzzbait or your favorite topwater up next to those pilings. Even in the middle of the day, you'll catch some fish that are suspended up in the water column. One thing I've learned fishing bridge pilings is you can have significant difference in depth right behind bridge pilings. It's a current break. And I'm talking about bridge pilings actually that are in rivers or lakes with a lot of current going through them. That stops the water, so there's a big deposit of rocks and silt on the downstream side. It can be as much as a 10 or 12 foot variance. Let's say if I'm sitting in 30 foot of water right here, I can have a 12 or 15 foot little hump right behind those pilings. So you may think it's not shallow enough for a deep diving crankbait. In reality, it is. You could have a really small hump behind each piling, and the same goes on the front side of those pilings. A lot of times that current hits that front piling and it washes out around the front of it, so it's deeper on the front side. There's a few things to keep in mind. With that being a current break, you have a lot of depth variances front to back. Big ones. Nice one. He hit it right on the upstream side of that bridge. And that was probably my third or fourth cast on that too, so it took a few casts to get that fish triggered. Typical summertime fish, just long and lean, not eating a lot. Still a lot of fun to catch right off the upstream side of that bridge piling. It's something I really pay attention to fishing bridge pilings, depending on your current or the wind for the given day. A lot of times they'll stack up on one side or the other. A very important thing to remember fishing bridge pilings is, or a mistake I guess I see people make, is they'll only fish the first or second one away from the bank. They feel like they get too deep when they get further out away from the bank. That's not the case. Those fish will use those bridge pilings all the way across a lake or a river, but they'll suspend on them. So don't be afraid to explore out the 15th or 20th. Some lakes may have 100 of them all the way across, maybe a mile-long bridge. You'll find one out there that'll have a big school of fish on it. Another reason bridge pilings a lot of times can be so great is you've got a road, and the road is built out across the lake, riprap all the way out, and then you got a bridge. All that current has to restrict right down through that bridge where those pilings are. So you've got a lot more current in a smaller area trying to get through that bridge. So that's one of those reasons why they're so good. It's a focus point or a concentration point that makes more current. Even in a great big lake where it's just maybe wind generated, it pulls it all down to a narrow point. And those fish are gonna congregate there, feed on shad, and all those things that go along with being a narrower point in the lake. Bridge pilings like this one right here actually have ledges on them. You know, they start small and get bigger as they go down. So you might have a ledge every 20 feet down that bridge piling. So keep in mind where that bite came from and how close to the piling it was. There's a good chance there's a bigger ledge where the bridge piling actually gets bigger down underneath the water. Oh, he was suspended down on that ladder. Water bass for Kentucky, whatever you want to call them, and all sizes. Ooh! That's very literally my next cast. Nice one. There's another Kentucky. Don't just stop fishing that bridge piling. You've got shade out here, and that is a fish holding piece of structure just like that bridge piling. And it's just basically that they're relating to that shade. Keep in mind where the shade is always on these bridges. We all dream of catching that state record or world record fish, but are you going to be ready when that magical bite happens? A couple things to keep in mind. Have your local game warden or state official's phone number programmed in your phone. Also, know where the closest certified scales are. Time is of the essence. The more you handle that fish or keep that fish out of the water, you're going to lose those precious ounces.
The basics of bass fishing are what we talk about in this next segment. We call it Bass School 101. Today we're learning from Professor Stacy King. School is now in session.
You know, there's so many different types of hooks on the market to fish soft plastic baits with, it's really hard to make a decision on which one to get and which one is the most effective. You know, through a lot of trial and error over the years, I've come down to about 4 different styles of hooks that are really good for me. And I'm going to try to show you what each one is for and why I like them. The first one I'm going to show you is a little G-lock worm hook. And this is a real light wire hook that's used for fishing finesse tackle, you know, with spinning rods and fluorocarbon line. I like to use this hook when I'm fishing a finesse worm, Texas rig, or when I'm fishing it on a drop shot. You can run that hook through the worm and texpose it, and what I mean by that is hook the point back into the worm, and you can fish it in extremely heavy cover. It really works good for me in that situation. The second hook I like real well is for big worms and big soft plastics, and it's a long shank, round bend, offset worm hook. It's a fairly heavy wire hook, so there's not much flex. I fish this worm hook a lot on heavy fluorocarbon line, sometimes even braid, but primarily heavy fluorocarbon. And I can get a good hook set, even in deep water, when I'm casting that worm out and fishing at 25, 30 foot deep. It's got a real wide gap, and by having a long shank, that point of that hook sets farther back in the worm. It's just a great hook for big worms. A third hook is a heavy cover worm hook. This hook is a hook that a lot of the pros have been using the last few years to flip their baits like beaver style baits or brush hogs or something like that. It's got a little keeper on the hook that's tied onto the hook, and that holds that hook in place in the soft plastic so that when you set the hook, you get a great hook set. And the heavy wire in that style is set for heavy braid. You can really flip some big bass out of heavy cover with that hook. And the last style hook I'm going to show you is the EWG style hook, which means extra wide gap. It's really a wide gap hook. It's made out of heavy steel, won't flex at all. You can fish it on 50, 80 pound test braid, and it's made for fishing the real fat soft plastic baits. Something like this horny toad. It's a great hook for a toad or that style bait. So what you want to do is pick the right hook for the right style of soft plastic bait that you're fishing with, and I think you'll get a lot better hookups and land a lot more bass. Hello everyone. Welcome to the granddaddy of all outdoor stores, Bass Pro Shops in Springfield, Missouri. We've got a great show for you today, so let's get started. Today, I'm going to show you a new technique that has taken the country by storm. It's the umbrella rig, and I'm going to bring it to you in depth. And then, Ott Defo is going to show us how to use the latest technologies to catch more bass. It's today's Bass School 101. But first, Edwin Evers, one of America's top elite tournament anglers, only needs 5 minutes to make you a better fisherman. Here he is with today's Fishing in 5.
guys, we're out here on the lake and it's early spring and man, there's tons of boats on these East Texas lakes, and a technique that I'd like to show you is power drop shot. And it's kind of a finesse power technique. It's taking a drop shot, putting heavier line, a little bit bigger weight, bigger hook, and catching fish behind a lot of other people that they may miss. Oh, it's a giant. It is an absolute mule. Come here, man, drop shot, you can catch a giant fish on it. So many people think you can catch just little old bitty fish on it. That's just not the case. You can catch these kind of right. Open your mouth, right there. Look at that fish, would you? Once you hook them on that little hook, if you just take your time, they're not gonna come off. She is just a freak of nature. There she goes. Oh, she's gonna jump. My setup is just a basic drop shot. The only difference is I've got a little bit bigger line, maybe a 1/4 ounce weight, and a short tag. Anytime I'm flipping a drop shot or casting a drop shot in shallow cover, I keep a really short tag. You know, when I'm talking about a tag, I'm talking about from the weight to the hook right here. I don't ever want it to be any longer than the bait I'm using. As far as baits that'll work, you know, just any type of like a Houdini worm, a finesse worm, this little yum dinger 4-inch worm, just anything like that'll work. Just something small, subtle. You know, like here in the springtime, like what I'm doing, you know, I'm trying to imitate a bluegill, you know, that might be around these beds or something. Works really well. Oh, what's a good one? That's a good one. Good one. Oh man. You don't ever know what you're gonna catch when you go to flipping a drop shot around, and sometimes they're just great big ones. A nice one. Oh, come here. I got you. Look how pretty that fish is, would you? He hammered it too. I had that drop shot down there next to that stump, and it, boom! You can tell right there that fish is spawning. That bloody tail. Thank you, girl. There she goes. One thing I want to stress to you guys, this is not just a springtime spawning technique. You know, drop shotting will work anytime. This power drop shotting that I'm talking about will work anytime that you've got a flip and bite around stumps, around lily pads, around docks, around any type of shallow cover. You can do this technique all across the country. It'll work in the summer if you're flipping lily pads. It'll work year-round, coast to coast. You know, what makes this so special is I am able to put a bait in the strike zone, move it, but not move it. I want to explain to you basically what I mean about moving that bait without moving it. I just flipped my little flip shot, drop shot, whatever you want to call it, right next to that stump. And I am just moving the bow in my line. If you look right down my line right there, the bow is all that's moving. I'm not moving that bait away from that stump. All I got to do is just shake that bow a little bit, makes that worm just kind of go like that, then I shake it again, then it kind of goes like that. That's the key to this deal. That's why it works. Fish. There's a little one. Pull and drag though. Jumping all over the place. Come here, buddy. Come here, come here, come here. Just a male. You know, what I've got here is I've got 12-pound fluorocarbon line, 12, 15, you can go all the way up to 20 depending on what the watercolor is. You just got a straight shank hook. It's a light wire hook, so it doesn't take a big hook set to get those fish, hook them right through the nose. One thing that I do when I'm tournament fishing for, you know, spawning fish is, you know, I'll drop a waypoint when I see a fish, but I'll also make notes. And, you know, like right here, I've got, you know, number 115, bed below pipe, or good 4-pounder, left pole of dock, right side of the canal. You know, I just take a very detailed description of where that fish is and how he's located, so when I come back in there, you know, on tournament day, I can make one cast directly to where that fish is from a distance. And, you know, a lot of times that's the money cast. Your very first cast from a distance, you can catch those fish. So I take really good notes with my waypoints to know exactly where they're at.
You know, I started hearing about the umbrella rig about a year ago, and I can tell you, they just flat catch fish. I'd like to show you how well they work for me in today's In-Depth. This umbrella rig is the darndest thing. Now, I'll tell you, I've got to admit to you that when I first started seeing this thing come around last summer, I was pretty skeptical of it. But the more I've seen it and the more I've used it, it's just unbelievable how many different applications and how many different kinds of water you can fish this thing and how effective it can be. From shallow to deep, it's almost something I would relate like to a jig or a spinnerbait. You can fish it from extremely shallow to extremely deep, and it's just a presentation that the fish are not used to seeing, and it's something, I mean, as far as the lures are concerned, but it really imitates such a school of bait fish moving along that it's just a great way to catch bass. I'm just amazed at the amount of quality fish you can catch on this thing. Here's one. Come in here. Hit the old umbrella rig. Oh yeah, come here, you little toad. It's funny, they always, about 80% of the time I find that they'll hit that longer wire. If you'll put a little bigger bait on that one, or if you'll put a different color bait on it, that sometimes that'll make those fish key on that particular one. And I find I catch more on that long wire than I do on the other four, or other two. Here's one thing worth noting. Always check your state regulations before you go out and start fishing this umbrella rig. You know, some states will let you fish 5 baits with 5 hooks. And some, like Missouri, where I'm fishing today, will only let you have 3 hooks on there, but you can use the attractors. Now, there's some states that won't even let you have the extra attractors on there. So you want to be sure and check your regulations before you go out and cast this thing in the water. Oh, God. That's a good fish right there. Come on in here. I missed that fish to cast before. Threw back in there and come across that same area and got her. Oh yeah, that's the one. Come in here, big old fat toad. That's one thing about that 50-pound test braid, you can swing them big old 4-pounders over the side like that. Man, now she got it on one of the side ones. Ain't that a pretty bass? Look at her. She is as fat and healthy as she can be. I'll release her back. The stage the fish are in today is pretty much a real true pre-spawn. The fish, a lot of the fish have started moving in out of the channels, and they're holding on brush piles and rock piles off of secondary and main lake points, and they're getting ready for it to warm on up a little bit so they can move back in the spawning area. So I'm targeting these fish, and I'm looking for these brush piles on my side scan. As you can see, there's a lot of scattered brush and rubble right in this area, and there on my down skin, you can see a real nice brush pile right there, setting out in about 12, 15 foot of water. And that's what these fish are holding on right now, and I'm throwing these rigs over those brush piles and those piles of rock and rubble out there on those points, and that's where I'm catching these fish. Look at all those brush piles. The crappie fisherman is a bass fisherman's best friend, because these guys build all these crappie piles with cedars, and man, the bass get in them too. I'm telling you what, I catch a ton of really nice fish out of these crappie piles. Look at this one coming into the screen right here. I can even see a lot of little fish down there around it. There's a lot of fish. That's probably crappie right there, but you can see there's a lot of fish around that one. I'm seeing some fish on my depth finder right in here, and I know there's some there. I'm gonna try to make a real long cast right out in there. I'm gonna count that thing down about 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then I'm gonna start that retrieve. Real slow, steady retrieve. Just enough to make those little paddles on the back of that swim bait wobble. I found that it's real important to determine basically the depth the fish are holding in, and then figure out how to count your bait down to that particular depth, and then figure out the actual cadence or the speed of retrieve. I've caught them several different ways since I've been fooling with this umbrella rig, from reeling it fast on top to real slow on the bottom. But it seems like if you determine what they want that particular day, most of them will be caught in that same type retrieve. Golly. Not very big, but boy, did he hit it hard. Come here, baby. The more I fish the umbrella style rig, the more versatile I really begin to see that it is. You know, you can fish this rig extremely shallow, extremely deep, very fast or very slow. It just depends on what size head you put on the rig. I want to reiterate how versatile this presentation can be, because we've got a late winter, early spring situation right now. The water temperature is about 43 degrees this morning. It's a beautiful day today, but it's still early. And these fish have just started to make their transition from the deeper water up into the staging areas where they're going to move in. And I tell you what, it can be so effective in this situation. I've just been having a ball with it, fishing several of the Ozarks lakes. And it's a killer presentation. Come on in here, baby. Come on in here. Come here. Oh yeah. Look at that old fat toad. She thumped that thing once and I missed her, and I just kept on reeling real slow. Pop, boy, she got it. Release her back. Be here next time I come back, won't you? You know, it's just really important to check the state regulations on how many hooks you can have on your umbrella rig. In Missouri here where I'm fishing, you can only have 3 hooks, but you can have a couple of dummies. You can go ahead and use 5 wires, and I just call these dummies up here, and I just use them as attractors. I think it helps create the school effect as it's going by them. And I'm sure once in a while you might miss a bass on one that'll hit at one of these, but I typically think most of them hit at the lower 2 or the middle, the longer one. And so it doesn't seem like I miss too many. I catch most of them that bite at it. And but be sure and check wherever you live. Some states are one way, and some will let you use 5, so check into it before you go fishing. The lures I've been using today are, this is a Zoom swimming fluke. It comes in a couple of sizes, and it's been extremely popular lately. It catches a lot of fish. I'm using the bigger one in a white ice color, and then also on the back end, on the longer wire on my umbrella rig, I'm using a big old grub here. This is a Chomper's swim bait grub, and it seems to be real good. I've got 4 of these swimming flukes on, and then I've got this Chomper's grub on the back, and it seems like I catch a lot of the good fish on that longer, bigger bait. Always try to put a different color or bigger bait on that for a bass to key in on. You'll notice I've only got 3 with hooks on it because I'm in Missouri and that's what's legal here. And then over here on my Deadly 5 shad rig, I've got smaller baits, and so I've got one rigged up with small baits and one with big baits, and I can pick them up and alternate if I feel like I need to. These are little old Bass Pro paddle tail minnows. It's really a great little old bait, and then I've got a big swimming fluke on the back, and I've caught several on that. But this is the one I've been catching my bigger fish on today. Bigger shad type baits, and the bigger fish are liking it. Come here, baby. I love the way they hit that thing. So vicious. Come in here now. Yes. Now that's a pretty one. Hit 2 hooks. Real nice fish. Let's put her back. All right. Let me show you folks a little bit about the type tackle I like to use to throw this umbrella rig with. As far as the line's concerned, I've come to the conclusion that 50-pound braid suits me real well. Some of the guys are throwing it on 65. I think that's a little bit of overkill. The reason I like the braid better than fluorocarbon, say 20 or 25 pound test fluorocarbon, is if you get hung up, and I've been fishing around a lot of timber with mine, I'll get hung up a little bit too deep that I can reach it, and I can break that fluorocarbon, but this braid, I can generally straighten the hook out and get my rig back. So I like the braid real well, and you can handle any fish that bites it on 50 pound test braid. As far as the reel goes, I like just a 6.4 to 1 gear ratio reel. That keeps that bait. I can fish it fast if I want to with that reel, or I can slow it down and crawl it along the bottom. And as far as the rod goes, I like a 7.6 heavy action carbon light, Bass Pro carbon light rod. And the reason I like this rod is because it's light and it's real comfortable for me to fish all day long. I can cast that umbrella rig time after time and it doesn't wear me out too bad. The rod's still got a pretty good tip that I can sling that bait with, but it's got lots of power and it seems to suit me well, and that's what I like to use. You know, this winter-spring scenario that I'm fishing is not the only time of the year that this presentation is going to be good. Paul Elias won a major event on it last October fishing extremely deep, and you're going to be seeing a lot of different applications for this tool.
Hey, when it comes to storage, I carry most of my garage with me when I go to a tournament. Nitro makes it really easy with all the monstrous storage compartments that they have. I can carry all the tackle that I need. Not only do I have a ton of storage, but it's exceptionally well laid out, so it's easy to keep organized and efficient out there on the water. One of the things I really like is the split lid design. I can keep my tackle to where I can sit on one side and work out of the other box. I keep all my crankbaits, jigs, spinnerbaits, and things like that. And when you open that lid, it stays open. That piston holds it open. It's got these neat little clips here, so you can keep the plastics that you're using that day right there where it's handy. The lids are insulated, so it's going to keep them cooler during those hot summer days. Check out the courtesy lighting. The storage compartments light up, so early in the morning or at nighttime, I can always find my tackle.
From Rookie of the Year to Runner-Up Angler of the Year honors, Ott Defo has done his homework. Today, he shows us how he uses the latest technologies in Bass School 101. Class is now in session.
I want to talk to you about something that I've been using lately that's really improved my fishing. And that's using a lot of the new technology that we have available. You know, with the smartphones and with like an iPad device, something like that. I've got some different apps on there that I use all the time, especially on new bodies of water that I'm going to. Like Google Earth, for example. I'll get on that and look at every bank in the whole lake before I ever get there. I can pull that up and just look at those satellite images of places that I've never been before. I can tell places that have clear water, have dirty water, places where there may be current flowing into the lake. And I can see a lot of different things from that. You can see shallow areas and deep areas, where you can go back and pull up some history pictures. And a lot of times you'll find places that it was taken with the lake being low. And you can see all kinds of different things then. You can see, you know, little rock piles, brush piles, things that were put there by people or just natural features. That's something that the only way you used to could be able to do that was to go there and actually fly the lake and have to look at it that way. You know, you can find little hidden places that aren't on just your paper maps or even on your standard GPS chips that go in your unit. You can find, you know, just little hidden areas that are hard to get into and those kind of things. That's a lot of the places I like to fish. Another great thing about these is you can pull up a radar map on your phone. And in case you're out there and the weather starts getting bad, you can pull it right up, see if there's any kind of storm cells that are come through exactly where you're at, because it'll show you. And then if there is, you know that you need to go take cover, do whatever you have to do to get out of the way of that storm. Something else I'll do is I'll drop pins and make a waypoint, then I'll go plug them into my unit so I've got it right there as well. I'll do that a lot whenever I'm looking at a map and the water's down in the picture, because you can go back to old pictures and find one a lot of times with the lakes being drawn down. You can drop a waypoint on a piece of structure, a rock pile or whatever it may be. You go right out there, put it in your GPS unit in your boat, you pull up and you fire right out there and you hit it the first time. That's really neat, and I've caught a lot of fish that way. So with all the technology we have available to us now, man, I know if you embrace it and use it in your fishing, it'll help you a bunch.